Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, a place where wonder lasts longer than a passing thought, and science is allowed to breathe at the same slow rhythm as the Earth itself. Tonight, we begin not with answers but with questions, because sometimes the gentlest doors are opened by curiosity alone. And tonight's door opens onto one of the most haunting questions humanity might ever ask itself. What if we were not alone? What if, from the very beginning, another intelligence had grown alongside us, step by step, thought by thought, shaping a world that was never just ours, but shared? It sounds like something belonging to myth, doesn't it? A story carried by firelight, whispered before sleep, half believed and half feared. But if we let the idea sink outside the noise of disbelief, if we let it rest quietly in the stillness of deep time, then the question softens into something more than a fantasy. It becomes a possibility. And strange as it may seem, deep time is full of possibilities. Most already forgotten, many already erased. Before we travel deeper into that thought, I'd like to ask you something simple, something you can hold quietly like a pebble in the hand. Where are you listening from right now? Are you somewhere close to the sea, where echoes of waves press against the shore? Or are you far inland, where the ground carries its own memories of ancient oceans long gone? Oceans that once spread across landscapes you might not imagine were ever underwater at all? And when was the last time you paused by water? Whether a tidal, a slow river, or even just a lake at dusk, and wondered not at the surface itself, but at what might be hidden below it, always there but never revealed. These are the kinds of questions that form the atmosphere of our journey. It isn't about proving or disproving. It isn't about rushing toward an explanation. It's about sitting for a while with what-ifs and could-bes, with the winding patterns of geology and biology, and with the long silences of epochs so old that even the continents themselves have folded and unfolded like restless dreamers. Because the Earth forgets in one way, yes, but it also remembers, in rock, in bone, in isotope trails pressed into stone, and we are only ever able to glimpse fragments of that memory. Now think again of the question, what if another species, with consciousness like ours but shaped by a different rhythm of thought, had walked beside us through that memory? Not as enemies necessarily, not even as rivals, but simply as another way of being. Another intelligence with its own language, its own vision of the stars, its own methods of remembering and forgetting. Maybe they would not have built what we built. Maybe their traces would be subtle, softer, less material. Or maybe they would be so deeply buried beneath cycles of erosion, floods, volcanic ash layers, and glacial grinding that we could never know today where they began or how far they might have traveled. Scientists remind us that everything we know from the past is limited by what survived geology's endless machinery of destruction and renewal. Fossils are rare, artifacts rarer still. Entire civilizations, if they ever rose and fell, could disappear beneath sediments that are still being rewritten by earthquakes and tides. Earth is both a keeper of memory and its eraser, recording just enough to intrigue us, only to let much more vanish into the recycling crust of its plates. This is entropy at a planetary scale. Not just the fading of heat or energy, but the fading of histories, erased futures that might still echo faintly in us. And yet, there are traces. There are always traces. Stone tools where they shouldn't be. DNA markers that tell us of species we once thought extinct, lingering inside us as quiet signatures. Ocean shelves that were once fertile plains, now drowned. Each fragment is a hint, a whisper, and perhaps, if we look closely enough, an invitation to wonder whether memory itself runs in layers like rock strata. Layers that we navigate not only with fossil hammers and isotope labs, but with imagination. Because imagination, too, is a tool of science. It is slower, softer perhaps, but it lingers where data fades. And when we ask, what if we were not alone? We are not simply inventing fiction. We are acknowledging the immense gaps still left in our story. The gaps remind us that we cannot yet see all of the Earth's memory, and maybe we never will. But maybe not knowing is what keeps us searching, what keeps us leaning closer to the silence, listening as though the planet itself still wants to tell us something more. So tonight, as we drift together into this journey, you can let the question sit with you, with no urgency to answer, no pressure to resolve. just the image of walking through time hand in hand with another kind of mind, one that mirrored ours yet moved differently. Like two rivers flowing parallel, sometimes close enough to touch, sometimes drifting apart, always reshaping the land beneath them. And as this image lingers, we might quietly ask ourselves, if the earth carries memories we cannot yet decipher, then what stories might those memories still hold about companions we never knew we had? And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? If this much can be forgotten, what else might we have lost? Perhaps a companion species, a mirror that once stood beside us in the forest of time. Imagine it. Not a shadow, not a rival, but another flame of consciousness flickering just beyond our sight. To think of a second intelligence is to think of ourselves doubled, reflected, shifted into a shape we recognize and yet do not understand. Biologists would remind us that evolution constantly explores paths, like rivers branching again and again into countless channels. Some dry to dust, some join larger flows, and a few carve valleys deep enough to last for ages. Our own branch of intelligence, language, memory, symbolic thought, could have been just one such current. Many others began, struggled, and folded back into silence. But what if one of those currents never fully disappeared? What if, while we rose, so too did another? Brain structures, after all, do not follow only one destiny. The intricate folds of a neocortex, the patterns of connectivity, the dance of electrical signals, these are possibilities, not inevitabilities. One change in climate, one shift in geology, one ice age beginning sooner or lasting longer could have tilted the scale in favor of another mind. Perhaps they saw differently not because their eyes were sharper, but because their neural paths prioritized other rhythms, patterns of sound, or flickers of movement, or the quiet symmetries of plants unfurling across seasons. To us, they would have been a mirror we could not ignore, like catching our own reflection in water, yet noticing it does not move in perfect step. Pause where we leap, a silence where we speak. Another voice that might finish our stories differently, creating myths that twisted away from ours but returned again at the edges, reminding us of something shared. Neanderthals give us the faintest echo of such an encounter. Their tools, their burials, their evidence of fire, so close to us and yet never quite the same. We carry part of them in our blood still, fragments of their genome woven into our own. A reminder that species do not always vanish. They ripple forward, hidden in us. Could there have been another like them, one whose memory was washed away more completely, so cleanly erased that we only sense its absence? Imagine the encounters, humans carrying one perspective, the mirror species carrying another. Would they have seen competition where we saw opportunity? Or collaboration where we saw limitation? Evolution does not demand rivalry. Symbiosis is as ancient as life itself. Perhaps our mirror mind shared fire with us, taught us rhythms of survival we later claimed as our own. Perhaps tools invented along riverbanks, once belonging to another, became part of our collective repertoire. The archaeological record is sparse, but silence does not mean it did not exist. Silence often means the earth has folded the evidence away. And so we wonder about the divergences. If one species favored dreaming more than doing, would their societies rise differently? If their neural chemistry leaned toward long memory rather than quick reaction, would they live more slowly, measuring time not by minutes but by seasons, by generations, by the drift of stones across glaciers? We do not know, but the thought lingers, our own way is not the only way. Perhaps it never was. The forest becomes an apt metaphor here. Picture two kinds of intelligence growing like trees beside one another. One straight, tall, reaching high into the sky of invention. The other wide, sprawling, weaving an undergrowth of insights we can only partly recognize. To us, they seem different, yet both are rooted in the same soil, the same geology of need and curiosity. Both shaped by climates that demanded flexibility, hunger that demanded strategy, and dangers that demanded foresight. And so even in imagining, the mirror reflects us back. Who are we, and what might we look like through other eyes? Not better, not worse, just different. The difference itself expands what intelligence means. That is the gift of mirrors. They remind us identity is not a fixed stone, but a reflection shifting with perspective. Scientists sometimes speak of untaken paths of evolution. Neural designs never realized, social strategies abandoned, possible branches curled back on themselves before flowering. To picture a second intelligence is to hold those untaken paths as alive, not in fossils but in possibility. For the Earth is vast enough to have hosted more than one mind capable of questions, of stories, of sorrow and wonder. And perhaps we still feel the absence because on some deep level, a part of us expects reflection. A single intelligence feels solitary. But with a mirror, the world would have been doubled. Myths would be stories of connection rather than isolation. Scientific revolutions would arrive as dialogues, not monologues. Even silence shared might have felt less empty. Maybe this is why the thought stays with us. Not because we have proof, but because something in us longs for an echo. A whisper to our whisper, a mind tracing the same constellations back to us. And yet, if the forest did once hold two voices, then somewhere, hidden deeply in bone, in soil, in forgotten riverbeds, faint traces must still wait to be uncovered. Just enough for us to ask the question again, just enough to make us wonder, what if memory itself is not ours alone to carry? If the forest once held two voices, then the earth itself must have recorded them somehow. Because the planet, in its own slow language, does not forget so easily. It carries memory in rock, in dust, in sediment stretched across eons. Geology teaches us this. Even rivers that seem like one may split and carve separate valleys. And perhaps intelligence works the same way. Evolution, like water, does not flow in only one direction. It branches, it wanders, it sometimes doubles back. One mind became ours, but could another current have slipped quietly away beside it? When we look at the Earth with scientific patience, we see that its archives are incomplete. Fossils are rare, preserved more by chance than by any rule. A great many lives, entire populations, are erased without trace. Bones dissolve in acidic soils. Ash covers and erases. Glaciers grind and bury. The record we hold is patchwork. Gaps far larger than what remains. And in those gaps, mystery lingers. Could there have been forms almost kin to us, testing thought, gesture, memory, only to be lost before we might recognize them? Consider the branching of valleys. A single glacier withdraws, water streams down, then divides. One course shifts east, carving long plains. Another cuts west, tracing deep gorges. Each channel carries the story of the same origin, but tells it differently in stone. Evolution is much the same. A spark in brain tissue, a new connection, a different rhythm of synapses, could have been enough to tip one lineage toward symbolic thought, while another grew into a slower, stranger form of awareness. Both would still carry the same beginning, but their futures would diverge like rivers split across soil. When scientists kneel in dry caves or riverbeds, brushing dust away from bone, they are not just digging into the past. They are listening for echoes. And some bones whisper of creatures so close to us, so nearly human, that the space between recognition and estrangement is unnerving. A skull with a brow heavier than ours. A hand bone shaped almost like our own but thicker. Species that walked upright, hunted, sang perhaps in ways we will never confirm. Almost us. Not entirely. Relatives, cousins, mirrors left unfinished. What these fragments teach us is not certainty, but humility. For every fossil we find, there are countless we never will. Each one is only a sliver of a chorus that once filled the earth. Whole populations vanish into silence, carried away by erosion and deep time's unyielding patience. What, then, have we already forgotten? Could a path have split, a valley of thought carved away from ours, leaving faint impressions that geology has since buried? We read isotopes in bone to hear ancient diets, carbon telling us the plants consumed, nitrogen telling us the animals hunted. Traces in teeth whisper of migration patterns, of seasons endured. Through these minute clues we stitch together lives that feel suspended beyond reach. Yet isotopes cannot tell us what visions filled their minds at dusk, nor what myths they may have whispered into the dark. If another branch of intelligence fed beside us, we may only glimpse the echo through chemistry, not through song. Picture a river plain in prehistory, mud-soft, water branching. Herds pass. One species builds simple tools, sharp edges struck from stone. Another, nearly the same, bends the same tools differently, handles material with a thought process we may never quite decipher. Both actions vanish in centuries. Tools left behind will scatter, bone will dissolve. One current flows forward to become us. The other, perhaps it stayed shallow and slow until entropy swallowed it completely. Or perhaps it carried its own long journey that we have not yet uncovered. The soil beneath us carries these stories like layered parchment, pages written and rewritten. Some words are erased, others overwritten with new ink. Whole paragraphs fade before we can read them. This is why paleontology is not just science, it is a meditation on forgetting. Every fossil is a rare fragment of memory. Every gap is an abyss we must learn to accept. But in that acceptance, wonder flourishes. The gaps leave open the possibility of pathways untaken, of creatures almost kin, of voices that never reached us. Rivers divide because the land insists upon it. Rocks tilt, slopes shift, water seeks gravity's patience. Evolution divides for similar reasons. Shifts in ice, in heat, in rainfall and sea rise. Our own human mind was shaped in these tremors of climate and geology. Another, equal in potential, might have been sculpted by the same forces into something only slightly different, something that walked beside us unseen. And so, as we follow the branching paths in soil and memory, we are left listening, not only to what we have found, but to what remains hidden. Evolution is not a single straight valley leading only here, only now. It is a great braided delta, rich with channels, some flowing still, others long evaporated. Could one of those quiet streams have carried another mind, one almost ours, almost kin, but lost to the great erasers of time and stone? And yet, if branches can split so easily, who is to say they may not join again? If rivers may divide, perhaps voices can as well. Let us picture it slowly, the way a dream takes shape. An ice age night, the air cold enough to sharpen every breath, silence stretched across wide plains of frost and stone, and then flickers of fire, not one but two. Two circles of warmth pressed into the darkness, separated just far enough to be distinct, yet close enough that their light overlaps on the snow. Here, on the edge of glacial winds, we imagine not a single kind of human life but two, their sparks mirroring each other beneath the same frozen stars. Around one fire, a song rises, low, rhythmic, built from the steady beat of sticks against bone. Around the other, another song begins, not identical, not competing, but weaving into the air like a counterpoint. Not a chorus yet, but not solitude either. Language doubled, syllables exchanged across the plain, each side pausing to listen to the other. Could this have been possible? Could two intelligences, distinct in their origin yet bound by survival, have shared sound, story, and rhythm on nights when the cold pressed too deeply to bear alone? When paleontologists study Ice Age caves, they find not just bones of mammoths and deer, but residues of fire, pigments smeared in ochre, carvings etched into stone. We know our lineage was not the only one to leave marks this way. Neanderthal hands traced pigments, Denisovans left traces of their passing, and still other fragments hint at presences not yet clearly named. In archaeology, silence surrounds these traces as much as certainty does. But silence does not rule out mystery. Silence invites imagination to step gently into the space between known facts and possible lives. Now imagine a broad mammoth rib stretched across both fires. On one side, red handprints pressed onto its surface. On the other, spirals engraved with a stone blade. Neither decoration alone tells a story we can fully decode, but together they seem to answer one another, gesture and mark meeting in the middle. Perhaps language itself began here, doubled, shaped not as a solitary invention but as a rhythm exchanged between species, each rephrasing what the other began. Science reminds us that language is deeply tied to anatomy, the vocal tract, the shape of the hyoid bone, the wiring of the brain. Yet culture does not live only in bone. It drifts between individuals, shared through repetition, echo, and pause. Could it be that our species refined speech by reflecting another's sound back at them, learning difference through dialogue? Perhaps syntax, repetition, even call and response all began not with isolated minds but with two firesides facing one another. Anthropology tells us myths are maps of memory, shaped long before writing ever arrived. So imagine myths doubled from birth. Two cosmologies unfolding side by side, sometimes colliding, sometimes melting together. Constellations named twice over, stars stitched into two patterns that overlap in the same night sky. Perhaps those nights of doubled firelight taught both sides that meaning was never permanent, that all stories exist in relation to those told nearby. At the heart of this vision is survival. The Pleistocene was not kind. Ice pressed hard, herds shifted in migration, storms erased camps overnight. Cooperation was never only a choice, it was a necessity. Two voices, two minds meeting across the snow, may have carried lessons neither alone could have discovered. Hunting strategies shared, dangers interpreted, tracks in snow deciphered differently but understood together. In this, the forest of voices becomes more than metaphor. It becomes the foundation of a culture shaped by listening. And perhaps a listener then is not so different from a listener now. You and I, tracing echoes of firelight in the dark, leaning closer to words that carry warmth even when evidence is faint. The past speaks softly, and we assemble it into rhythm. We receive fossils, isotopes, pigment residues, and into those fragments we breathe the possibility of two songs meeting. Even if it lasted only a few centuries, even if it happened only in scattered valleys while glaciers loomed above, the imagination of it shows us something vital. That language might not have been born in solitude. That intelligence might not have formed in isolation. That dialogue itself, the essence of storytelling, may have emerged because there was always another mind listening, another mind answering back. So picture once more those circles of firelight, close but distinct. Picture the air carrying two sets of words across frost, two kinds of laughter rising and falling, two different timbers laid like overlapping shadows on the snow. That moment, whether it happened or not, feels alive in us still. Because nothing has shaped our species more than the presence of another voice to shape words against. And yet, if two fires could once burn side by side, we must ask, what did the earth keep of those nights? If two fires once burned side by side, then the earth itself must have carried their warmth forward, inscribing it not in words but in matter, because soil remembers in its own quiet way. Sediment, after all, is a kind of diary, a constant, unhurried accumulation of stories. Dust falls after a storm. Ash drifts after eruption. Grains settle from rivers into valleys. Over centuries, over millennia, these layers become a memory of climate, of life, of vanishings. To bend close to soil is to listen to a low and patient account. What would that account tell us if two civilizations had risen, not one? Sediment holds isotopes as carefully as ink holds language. Carbon traces diets long digested. Oxygen marks temperatures endured. Strontium whispers where bones once walked. A handful of soil, to the geologist, is not only dirt but a summary of time. And if we dared to imagine two intelligences alive together, what would it mean to hold soil that carried fragments of both? Perhaps two distinct chemical patterns, ashes from fires with differing fuel, residues from tools shaped in different ways, the faint scatter of wastes left from two styles of survival. Two trails pressed into the same ground, parallel yet distinct, waiting for us to read them. Rivers, more than any force, shape this memory. They swell with meltwater, tear fragments from valleys, carry sands and bones downstream. They bury as much as they reveal, and in burying they preserve. The flood that destroys one settlement may shield it forever beneath layers of stillness. A bone dropped by a riverbank may vanish into mud to be discovered 10,000 years later, hard as stone yet whispering of marrow that once lived. If a second civilization had risen beside ours, rivers may have been the only faithful witness, recording their journeys in layers no eye noticed at the time. And here we feel the strangeness of absence. Archaeology shows us clear sequences: flaked stone, bone needle, pottery shard, metals forged. These trails, when laid side by side, draw the path of human invention. But what if another path was there too, braided through but overlooked, woven into the strata just as two river currents can run together without mixing entirely? Could two sets of tools lie in the same earth, only to be assumed as one story, because we no longer know how to see the difference? Consider the ground beneath your feet. With every step, you press against countless layers of hidden history. Beneath grass lies soil rich with roots. Beneath soil, clays shaped by floods. Beneath clays, gravels pressed down by older rivers. And within those gravels may rest a shard of tool, a carved bone, an echo of campfires cold for 100,000 years. To walk across land is to skim across archives we cannot fully read. If two civilizations shaped this same earth together, then the record of that companionship might lie directly below us, unseen but not erased. Science teaches us to look at isotopes in sediment cores drawn from ancient lakes. These cores are slim cylinders of mud, yet they hold chapters older than civilization: pollen grains of vanished forests, charcoal from vanished fires, diatom shells that flourished and then declined. Each layer is a line of a poem we are still decoding. If two species rose together, their presence would ripple through these cores, parallel peaks of burning, two kinds of charcoal signatures, two kinds of pollen shaped by differing practices of land use. The record, faint but possible, could still be waiting. And yet, geology is not generous with memory. It erases as much as it enshrines. Mineral waters dissolve bone as easily as they fossilize it. Glacial scrapes grind valleys into silence. Entire histories vanish not with a storm, but with patience. Centuries of wind, thousands of years of river coursing. Entropy ensures that the record is incomplete, riddled with gaps. Gaps where we might place our what-ifs. Gaps that call out to imagination, asking us to consider what other stains, other tracings, could once have been there. Picture now two trails across deep time. One, the one we know, etched with stone to bronze to steel. The other, perhaps slower, perhaps less visible, perhaps woven into organic material long since faded. A civilization that built not towers of rock but of wood, woven with grass, remembered in songs instead of walls. Such a trail could have left almost nothing behind, except for disturbed soils, campfire charcoal, and isotopic traces so faint we confuse them for our own. If that is so, then those layers of memory are all but indistinguishable, folded into ours like rivers that merge and mingle until we no longer know which branch was which. And maybe that is why the thought lingers. Rivers remember, but imperfectly. They remember in fragments carried far from their source, in ridges and bars built from colliding sediments, in patterns too broad for us to grasp while standing close. To study them is to see only pieces. But to imagine two presences, two stories written into the same soil, is to grant our planet a memory deeper and stranger than we usually allow. Because soil is not silent. It speaks of fire. It speaks of water. It speaks of time so immense that our own lives feel brief as shadows. And in its layered patience, it invites us to wonder whether some other mind once shared the same plain, the same riverside, the same night sky, only to be folded into Earth's memory until little remains but echoes. And yet, if soil can carry whispers this long, what else might be hidden there, beneath our very steps? If soil can whisper of forgotten trails, then what might stone itself have once carried? For stone endures longer than bone, longer than wood, longer even than rivers. And yet, even stone is not immune to erosion, quakes, floods, and the great recycling of Earth's crust. Imagine, then, the faintest possibility: two intelligences not only walking the same plains, but building upon them. Two sets of hands shaping walls, raising enclosures, carving dwellings into cliffsides. Two architectures layered into time, only to be broken, scattered, and folded back into the earth as quietly as they emerged. The breath of stone cities, lost before we could name them. Geology teaches us that nothing is stable forever. Mountains rise but split. Faults open, swallow valleys whole. Earthquakes topple even the strongest structures, grinding them into unrecognizable rubble. Entire coastlines subduct beneath the plates, their stones carried down into magma, recycled as if memory itself were erased. If another species shaped the land with purpose, raising cities parallel to ours, then most of their work could be gone already. Turned back into sand, buried under new rivers, sunken beneath seas that rose and fell again and again. Such a disappearance would not be unusual. It would be inevitable. Still, the thought is haunting. Archaeologists call our legacy technofossils. The record our cities will leave one day as traces in rock, concrete, asphalt, alloys, plastics, radioisotopes. Future strata will tell of us in strange clues, harder than bone, longer lasting than wood. But what if we are not the first layers of this kind? What if, deep beneath feet and fields, there are other technofossils, different architectures, different inventions, folded away by the slow violence of geology? Could the ruins of another intelligence already sleep beneath our quarries and mines, so deeply eroded that we no longer even recognize them as artificial? Stone cities, imagined in this way, bring with them questions. Would another species have built in massive permanence, carving their symbols into granite the way we carve monuments? Or would their architecture have leaned softer, choosing the temporary, woven dwellings, organic blends of material that left almost nothing at all? If the latter, their breath would have vanished like mist, memories carried only in disturbed layers of soil. But if the former, if they once built of stone as we do, then echoes may remain, shaped blocks hidden within mountainsides, aligned stones mistaken for natural walls, fissures that were once roads swallowed by seismic fracture. Consider the way time has treated our earliest attempts at stonework. Temples buried beneath sands, standing stones left toppled, walls crumbled into indistinct ridges mistaken for hills. When archaeologists clear them, their designs return, but without patience, they vanish into geology's camouflage. Multiply this by 10, by 100 millennia, and the camouflage is complete. Cities do not vanish because they were never there. They vanish because Earth refuses to let them stand forever. And yet, something remains. Isotopes embedded into the surrounding soils, minerals scorched by fire, traces of mining visible as strange strata cut through bedrock. If two intelligences carved into the land, we may unknowingly read their work already, misinterpreted as natural processes or unexplained anomalies. Perhaps a collapsed quarry is catalogued as a sinkhole. Perhaps a mined outcrop is thought of as glacial erosion. Silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it means misunderstanding. Imagine walking through a quiet desert ridge today. Stone juts in unfamiliar shapes. You might think it only wind-carved, water-cut. But what if the angles told another story? What if the patterns hinted at once deliberate intent, but softened so thoroughly by erosion that no one dares claim them? A city dissolved not in fire or war, but in patience. A city erased in slow breath. The speculation extends further. If two minds once built, perhaps they built differently. Our cities rise like monuments, hierarchies solidified in stone stacks. Another intelligence might have built outward instead of upward, sprawling structures low to the ground, flowing rather than towering. Their cities might resemble landscapes rather than skylines. In erosion, these would fade faster, their whisper harder to detect. But the possibility remains that within geomorphic patterns, the bends of hills, the rings of buried ridges, some fragments of architecture still breathe. And so we ask with humility, are we truly the first to change the crust at such scale? Or could layered beneath our history be the half-dissolved remnants of another, lost not through mystery, but through geology's ceaseless recycling of itself? Stone cities breathe even when they are gone. They breathe through absence, through suggestion, through landscapes that feel inhabited even when they are not. The Earth is vast, and our memories of it are shallow, but the planet's body carries stories unseen. Somewhere beneath us, stone may hold secrets not of mountain, not of river, but of mind. And yet, If stone can be reshaped and swallowed, if memory itself can crumble into rock and still breathe faintly, then what other architectures might lie waiting in silence, waiting to be recognized? If stone can hold the faint breath of forgotten cities, then perhaps the softer traces, the fragile ones, belong not to conflict but to companionship. We tend so often to imagine encounters between species as rivalries. Hunters against hunters, competitors for scarce game, adversaries staring across a frozen plain. But what if that wasn't the only story? What if, instead, companionship endured? Two kinds of intelligence not locked in battle but drawn together, helping each other resist the erosion of time and the pull of entropy. Entropy is the law of fading. Heat disperses, bodies break down, memory fades into silence. But life has always resisted it. Cells knit themselves against decay. Ecosystems weave synergy to endure what no element alone could withstand. And what if minds, too, found ways to resist entropy, not only through invention but through friendship? Two intelligences carrying one another across millennia, offering what the other lacked, preserving balance in a world that so often tips toward disintegration. Picture it here. Ice Age valleys where mammoth herds move like slow rivers of fur, their tusks cutting the horizon. Human groups, small and fragile, prepare to hunt, but they are not alone. Another species, a mirror of their intelligence yet shaped differently, waits at the edge of the tree line. Perhaps together they track, one reading footprints with precision, the other sensing wind and herd movements. The kill becomes possible not because of domination, but because of synchrony. Food, warmth, survival shared, both enduring longer than either could alone. Such alliances would leave almost nothing for us to find. Soil records bones and stone, but not gestures of cooperation. Fossils freeze the violence of tooth marks, the scatter of broken tools, but not the passing of fire from one hand to another, or the way two voices might have called across a field to guide one another home. And yet, absence does not erase the possibility. It simply leaves us open to wonder. Could our lineage carry echoes of a partnership long folded into silence, unrecorded but not unlived? Even now, anthropologists recognize that survival was never solitary. Our species endured because we leaned on collaboration, weaving cultures that extended memory beyond individual lifespans. A mirror species might have deepened this logic. Imagine an exchange of knowledge. One mind cultivating the subtle use of plants for medicine, the other perfecting cooperative hunts on windswept plains. Shared nights translating these skills back and forth might have brought resilience greater than either species could achieve alone. In physics, entropy drifts toward dispersal. In life, companionship gathers what would otherwise scatter. The warmth of two fires together resists the cold more than two fires apart. The rhythm of two songs woven into one travels farther than either sung alone. Could it be that the most powerful tool against entropy was not weapon nor wall but the willingness to stand beside another consciousness and see survival as a shared art? When geologists uncover layers of charcoal in caves, they rarely ask whose fires they were. But what if the ashes are mingled? Two hands striking sparks from different stones, feeding wood into a mutual glow. We will never separate their isotopes, never divide the chemistry of shared heat. But in those ashes, there may already be friendship recorded, though unmarked by name. The legacy of companionship is not always visible. It lives in resilience. Herds thinned less quickly, climates endured for centuries longer, tragedies softened by shared skill. Even if we never find their landmarks or tools, traces of survival stretched beyond what alone might have been possible could already be written in migration patterns, in the persistence of camps, in the unexpected endurance of populations. Perhaps companionship left its imprint in outcomes, not artifacts. Friendship between species challenges our instinct to think of ourselves as solitary heirs of intelligence. It suggests that in deep prehistory, identity may not have been cleanly drawn. Our ancestors might have looked into other eyes and found not rivalry, but recognition. Two minds reflecting back not enemies, not doubles, but companions. And what if that companionship never truly ended, but simply folded into us? Perhaps in the impulses to teach, to share, to build for others, lingers a memory of a time when survival was not singular but paired. Entropy ensures we forget detail, but memory bleeds forward in subtler forms. The soil may not have carved their names, but perhaps we carry the echo of their presence in the way we reach toward one another even now. And so we return to the quiet, haunting possibility. Not all encounters were rivalry. Perhaps some were trust. Perhaps some endured long enough to shape us beneath notice. Perhaps some still breathe faintly in the way our stories resist vanishing. Stories told not because they were invented, but because they were remembered from something real. And yet, if companionship could survive the cold, the hunger, and the weight of entropy, what other hidden harmonies might still be folded inside deep time, waiting in silence for us to listen? If companionship once endured across the cold, then perhaps it is written not in soil alone, but in bone. Paleontology teaches us this. Every mark tells a story. Every scar on fossilized remains is a record of encounter. The deep grooves on a rib, the clustered punctures in a femur, the slashes across mammoth ivory, they are more than wounds. They are signatures of strategy, pressed into the past like an ancient language of survival. And sometimes, those signatures seem layered, as though more than one hand once hunted the same world. Picture the vast Pleistocene plains, where mammoths moved like tidal waves of life, their herds stretching for miles, heavy breath steaming into the air. They were living fortresses, 12 feet tall at the shoulder, tusks longer than a person's height, hides nearly impenetrable. To bring them down required planning, patience, courage not born of one mind alone but of coordinated groups. Fossil bones show us the results. Deep punctures where spears pierced flank, scratches carved where tusks met their end. Marks that prove intelligence was there, intelligence strong enough to face giants. Now imagine if not one kind of intelligence carried this burden, but two. Humans flanking the herd, their stone-tipped spears aimed for tender flesh beneath the legs. A mirror species circling from another angle, perhaps with different tools, thicker shafts, sharpened bones shaped by another tradition of thought. Two strategies converging on the same prey, two methods pressed into the same hunt. If this happened, then the mammoth bones might already carry their shadows, a double pattern of wounds that paleontology has yet to disentangle. We often interpret bone histories with a single narrative: humans brought mammoths down. But what if some of the wounds etched into ivory tell of a second mind with its own approach? A thrust at a different angle, consistent not with our hunting style but with another that persisted beside ours. Perhaps the slashes preserved on tusks are not redundant, weapons repeating the same mistake, but collaborative, overlapping strikes from different techniques. Cooperation recorded where it cannot speak, only linger. Predators in ecosystems shape one another. Wolves and lions, when forced to share a plane, learn from each other. Changing tactics, avoiding full confrontation, sometimes even following the same herds in loose rhythm. Paleontology records this coexistence in tooth marks, in kill sites, in the footprints preserved in mud. Why not, then, with us? Could our species and its mirror have shared prey without erasing one another, long enough to shape skill against skill, side by side beneath Ice Age skies? Consider a frozen kill site. Mammoth ribs cracking in the cold, ice forming over blood-dark mud, scavenger footprints peppering the scene. Archaeologists can trace the angle of spear shafts left embedded, can measure the kinds of cuts left by butchering tools. In some sites, patterns vary, sharp flints scatter beside more rudimentary implements, as though two technological traditions converged in the same place. We call them transitional, experimental, but perhaps they reflect not transition, but coexistence. Two voices making separate marks on the same shared chapter of survival. If so, the gifts exchanged would not only be food, but learning itself. One group discovering the trajectories of spears thrown from pits, the other refining close-quarter attacks against tendons and lungs. Over seasons, these methods might blend just as stories blend. Little by little, both minds would grow from the presence of the other, their strategies fusing until the traces became indistinguishable in bone. What remains then is less the evidence of difference than the quiet trace of influence, the subtle fingerprint of shared adaptation. And perhaps this is how companionship survives. Less in visible monuments, more in faint shadows that pass forward almost invisibly. In the bones we unearth today, we do not see two species standing side by side. We see instead layered wounds, doubled patterns. We see shadows. And those shadows invite us to pause, to imagine the missing half of the story that bones alone cannot tell. Underneath the mammoths, then, is not only their weight pressed into permafrost and soil. It is also the weight of memory, the burden of hunts that may have carried two fates at once. Bone does not forget, not entirely. Its fractures, its scars, are time's recordings. And while we cannot yet name the hands that left them, we can still wonder. What kinds of company once moved in the shadows of mammoths, shaping us even as we shaped them? And yet, if the bones still whisper fragments of parallel lives, what myths might the skies above those hunts have carried, when two species gazed upward together into the same stars? And yet, if mammoth bones carried the marks of two strategies, then their hunters must also have carried eyes upward. For every people gazes at the sky. Stars are not only points of light, they are mirrors, canvases for meaning, bridges that stretch thought beyond the horizon. Under the long, aurora-draped nights of the Pleistocene, fire crackling low, two kinds of minds may have reclined side by side, watching. One constellation, two interpretations. One sky, two myth lenses layered at once. Imagine it carefully. The aurora rippling green and pale violet above. Rivers of charged particles flowing across the stratosphere as if the sky itself were alive. Beside one fire, humans point, tracing an elk out of scattered stars. By another voice, a different story is laid across the same points. A serpent, perhaps, or a river of spirits carved into night. The myths are not rivals. They coexist as threads, one weaving through the other, forming a double tapestry in which meaning doubles back on itself, echoes answering echoes. Anthropologists remind us that myth is not distraction. It is survival carried into story, the explanation of ice, of thunder, of the endless cycles of cold and thaw. Myths hold memory. They hold orientation, navigation, even instruction. So what if two intelligent species gazed upward together and shared their stories? The constellations would not be singular. They would be doubled, entire cosmologies reflected back and forth in the crackle of language, each one adding depth to the other. We know that every culture rearranges the star maps differently. The hunter, the bear, the plow, the river, forms that speak as much about the earth below as the lights above. If minds other than ours interpreted the stars, their stories could have survived in fragments passed through us, absorbed unconsciously into our oral traditions. Some myths may feel older than their people, older than their languages. Perhaps that is because they carry remnants of double origins, two perspectives once tethered together under the night. Picture a child of one species listening to the story told by the other. The sky above turns with slow patience, and the child learns not just how to see, but how to imagine. These are gifts exchanged across the firelight of time. And then that child grows, tells the story again in their own tongue, only subtly altered. Thus myths migrate, twist, entwine. The lines between species blur in narrative even as bones beneath their feet remind them of difference. The aurora adds its own voice, arching, waving, cascading curtains of cold color. Perhaps one people called it the breath of ancestors. Another, the trail of prey spirits crossed by hunters in the heavens. Each description valid, each necessary. When told together, the sky becomes layered, richer, as if the universe itself welcomed two sets of storytellers to interpret its quiet patterns. Science, too, joins the continuum. Today, we know the aurora is born of solar particles colliding with Earth's magnetic shield. But that story carries no less wonder than the serpent or the river. It is simply another lens, one shaped much later. What if our own scientific narratives carry, buried inside them, the same impulse that once stirred in mirror species beside us? The impulse to explain the luminous motions above our world in ways that give meaning to the dark. It's possible, even likely, that none of these stories would leave material fossils. Myths belong to voice and memory, not stone. Yet their traces linger in archetypes. The recurring trickster, the cosmic animal, the celestial river. Could these figures be fusion points, places where two separate lineages of myth once overlapped? Maybe, maybe not. But when we lie beneath the stars and feel older than our own memory, perhaps it is because somewhere in us, across bloodlines and silence, we remember being more than one species gazing upward. The sky of two myths forces us to rethink solitude. To imagine twin gazes doubling back on one another across the same constellations opens a question. Have we ever truly invented meaning alone, or has every meaning been born from dialogue, even one buried deep in prehistory? Two intelligences, two firesides, two mythic horizons beneath a single aurora. The thought lingers softly, as steady as starlight. And though we will likely never prove these doubled stories, the possibility is itself transformative. For maybe what matters is not whether the myths were once spoken, but that we can still feel their echo in the sky above us. And yet, if stories shaped by two perspectives could fuse into one, then what about the tools they left behind? Could stone itself hold conversations between species, if we knew how to listen? And yet, if two sets of myths could overlap in the sky, then perhaps conversations unfolded in stone as well. Fossils remind us of this truth. They are dialogues frozen between time and matter, bone and mineral speaking together until the distinction blurs. Shells dissolving, replaced grain by grain with quartz, calcite, pyrite, life and geology collaborating, quietly creating memory through transformation. Each fossil is a conversation held in silence, carried forward across epochs so vast that time itself feels different. Now imagine that same conversation echoed not only in shells and bones, but in tools. A flake of stone struck by one hand, lying in sediment beside another worked flake made differently, by another hand with a slightly different tradition. Two conversations left in the same bed of earth, one angled, precise, another broader, heavier, curved toward another style of use. Both buried, both preserved, both waiting. Geology becomes an archive not only of organisms but of minds. Archaeologists often find scatterings of tools and wonder, were these experiments, errors, lessons in craft? Perhaps. But perhaps the variance hides something else, a doubled authorship. Two species knelt on the same ground, breaking stone against stone in slightly different rhythms. One learning from the other, one imitating then altering, one innovating while the other observed. The record left behind is almost indistinguishable. Just chips, flakes, cores. But layered there may be an ancient dialogue in tools, parallel inventions folding across one another like overlapping voices. Think of it this way. When we touch a flint blade in a museum, we hold not only the edge of utility but the trace of a thought. A thought about angles, pressure, leverage, balance. Now multiply that by two different minds, a dual stream of thought carved into the same material, converging in the same layer of soil. Perhaps this is why some archaeological sites puzzle researchers. Certain tools appear out of place in style, not quite fitting the expected sequence of innovation. Are these anomalies errors in dating? Or are they overlooked evidence that more than one intelligence contributed to the archive of invention? Fossils of creatures give us anatomy, but fossils of tools give us decisions. The choice to strike here, to sharpen there, to attach via sinew or leave handheld. Each decision is a vocabulary of mind recorded in material. Fossils of tools are like frozen sentences, constructions of grammar spoken in stone. And it is within these grammars that the possibility of conversation emerges most vividly. Could some Stone Age layers contain two dialects of thought side by side, the record of species speaking to one another in the only language both could share? The shaping of matter? Geology makes sure none of this is clear. Tools slide downslope with rains, are buried in floodplains disturbed by animals. Bones mix between eras. Sediments tilt under tectonic strain. The archive is silent not because nothing was there, but because too much has been blurred. And in that blurring, speculation steps in not as distortion but as openness. If the archive is uncertain, then it leaves space for possibilities that would otherwise slip away. Look again at a fossil conversation, a mammoth bone punctured by spear points. Within its marrowed silence is an exchange, hunter and hunted, anatomy and intention, both recorded at once. If bone can hold such tension, why not tools? A single flake may preserve at once the moment of strike, the material of earth, and the cognition of the mind that shaped it. When two traditions overlap, their tools together may form a duet. These duets might not be harmonious. They could be arguments recorded in stone. One design sharpening toward elegance, another refusing refinement, choosing durability instead. But whether conversation or argument, what survives is the undeniable fact of plurality. The earth does not remember only one way of being, it remembers divergence, captured together in its sedimentary patience. In this way, perhaps fossils are not simply static reminders of what lived, but participants in a dialogue that continues across time. Each fossil we uncover is a voice answering back to us across millions of years, saying, "Look, we were here, and we left a trace." If another intelligence once knelt in the dirt with us, their part of the sentence may still be here, half erased, waiting below layers of windblown sand and river silt. What we call anomalies might be their voice still answering. So fossils and tools together become something more, a library of conversations the earth itself has held. Not with words, not with myths, but with the slow endurance of matter. Deep time is full of such exchanges, between climate and ocean, between mountains and erosion, between bone and stone. Perhaps our greatest omission is assuming the conversations belong to us alone. And as this thought settles, we might ask quietly, if stone can record the voices of two species in dialogue, then what of climate itself, impartial and vast? Could it also have carried their shared story, shaping two species at once beneath the same sky of ice and fire? If stone can hold the record of conversations, then climate must have been the stage upon which those conversations unfolded. Because climate is the great impartial force, indifferent to species, culture, or intention. Glaciers advance with slow inevitability, swallowing valleys in white silence. Then they retreat, releasing torrents of meltwater, reshaping rivers, and opening plains. These cycles arrive like rhythms in a song, repeating again and again across tens of thousands of years. For us they mean challenge, and for any intelligence sharing the same earth, they would have meant the same. Climate does not favor. It only tests. Imagine humans moving through these oscillations, their fires flickering through long cold, their shelters shaped from bone, hide, stone. Side by side, perhaps another intelligence also endured, developing strategies that diverged from ours, yet tuned to the same tempo of winter and thaw. A climate cycle does not allow pause. Herds migrate farther. Plants shift their zones. Fish disappear from rivers. To survive requires adaptation, and adaptation itself becomes a kind of memory. Each response held in story, in tool, in gesture carried forward. For one species, a myth of endless ice. For another, perhaps a tale of returning waters. Both records carved into culture, both preserved without knowing they were mutual. Geologists can track these rhythms with surprising clarity. In ice cores pulled from Greenland and Antarctica, bubbles of ancient air preserve a map of temperatures long vanished. In stalagmites, isotopes of oxygen reveal rainfall patterns. In sediments at sea, tiny shells tell of plankton blooms that waxed and waned with warmth. Layer after layer, climate shows us its cycles, impartial and insistent. It did not only sculpt mountains and rivers, it sculpted minds. Because in living beside cycles of harshness and reprieve, intelligence itself had to bend, to attune itself to uncertainty. If there were two intelligences, then both would have been shaped under this shared rhythm, problem-solving parallel to one another, both carving survival out of the same impartial stage. Consider what companionship in climate might have meant. Perhaps humans mastered flexibility, moving often, following herds. Perhaps their mirror species mastered endurance, building more permanent shelters, shaping strategies for withstanding famine without flight. Each would take from the other what branches of thought they required, each watching as the great glaciers shifted south, then withdrew again. Memory of ice would not be personal. It would be cultural, carried as warnings, as lessons for descendants. And perhaps each species would tell its children, this has happened before and it will happen again. Survival requires not only strength of body, but patience of mind. Climate cycles invite humility. They show that progress was never linear, that warmth we call opportunity could vanish within a single lifetime, replaced with cold that imprisoned entire continents. Two cultures, living alongside each other, would not have escaped this truth. They would have been tested equally, and in the testing both may have learned that no species alone commands the Earth. The Earth commands both, through drought and ice, through shifting coastlines and floods. Isotope studies reveal that during glacial peaks, game thinned, plants struggled, and entire ecosystems shifted southward in retreat. Perhaps these trials made dialogue between species more likely, not less, not collaboration born of kindness but of necessity. Two cultures weaving survival tactics together, sharing not myth now but method, when to move, what to eat, how to hide from the endless cold. Such exchanges may leave almost nothing in the fossil record, yet their influence could ripple forward invisibly, preserved as instincts and traditions that still echo faintly within our choices today. And here, standing in the present, it is difficult not to notice the symmetry. Just as our ancestors faced abrupt shifts of climate, so do we. Just as they adapted, so must we. In that sense, we carry forward their cultural memory, the understanding that resilience is never solitary. It was not solitary if two intelligences endured together once before, and it is not solitary for us now. Climate's rhythm demands dialogue, improvisation, endurance, memory shaped into survival. Glacial retreats, warming cycles, sudden droughts. None cared for which mind faced them, which story explained them. Both species, if there were truly two, were tested beneath the same impartial sky. And so we wonder, if climate was the shared teacher, then who was the better student? Were we the ones who endured because of flexibility or because of companionship? Could it be that our survival carries hidden traces of their problem-solving too? And yet, if climate could shape not one intelligence but two, then what of the oceans themselves? Could they not have hidden whole landscapes, and perhaps whole stories, now drowned but waiting in silence beneath the waves? And yet, if climate carved two intelligences together across plains of ice and thaw, then oceans too must have played their part. For the seas are never still, never fixed in their shape. Coastlines are illusions of stability, temporary boundaries that shift with temperature and time. With each glacial retreat, oceans rose. With each advance, waters fell back. Shelves of land were alternately exposed and drowned, holding stories of lives that once walked there, now hidden beneath the surface. If there were truly two species of intelligence, then perhaps they shared these drowned worlds, leaving memories pressed into seabeds, preserved in silence no I can yet see. Imagine the shorelines of the last ice age. Vast tracts of land stretched outward where oceans are now deep. Doggerland in Europe, Sunda and Sahul in Southeast Asia, Beringia stretching between Siberia and the Americas. These were not marginal spaces, but fertile plains, rich with rivers and forests, grasslands where herds moved and hunters followed. Millions of square kilometers once belonged to dry ground, carrying the footsteps of those who lived, camped, built. When the ice melted and seas rose again, those footprints vanished, swallowed into salt water. Their memory lingers not in written record, but perhaps still in the subtle chemistry of submerged soil. Geologists search these places with patience. Sonar scans reveal ridges and old riverbeds snaking across seabeds. Sediment cores extracted from offshore plains tell of pollen once blowing from trees, of lakes and marshes that supported human habitation. These cores preserve isotopic whispers, shifts in oxygen that record ancient atmospheres, shifts in carbon pointing to the burning of plant life. Were there more than one intelligence shaping fires there? Did two lineages once share those coastlines, their camps and tools side by side, now invisible beneath waves? When fishermen drag nets along seafloors, they sometimes pull up artifacts. Antler picks, stone blades, the bones of animals that no longer walk above water. Each artifact feels like a voice rising briefly from beneath. But how many more thousands lie undisturbed, dissolved by salt or buried too deep to reach? Oceans, like glaciers, are destroyers and preservers at once. They erase visibility while holding memory in darkness. Two intelligences could easily have vanished into such archives without leaving us more than a scattered clue. Speculate on this for a moment. Perhaps humans settled the higher ridges, building stone rings in the open. Their mirror species, meanwhile, lived in the wetlands, shaping wood and reed into shelters softer, more impermanent. One existence above sea level would drown slowly with each melt pulse. The other first inundated as waters spread through lower valleys. The ruins of both gone now, except for offset charcoal, seems lying in cores deep beneath the waves. If we ever recover them, they might tell us not just of one culture of fire, but two, coexisting, tested, then erased by the one impartial force no tool could resist, rising water. The ocean is more than a sink for ruins. It is an agent of transformation. Subduction swallows continental shelves, pulls them into mantles where no archaeology can follow. Currents scatter bone before it can fossilize. Saltwater infiltrates artifacts, decaying memory more quickly than sand or soil would. Yet in strange ways, traces still persist. Isotopes locked in coral reefs, sediments locking in ancient soot, drowned caves where the bones of deer still lie as if waiting. If two minds once shaped these coastlines, the ocean may still hold their conversation, invisible yet not entirely gone. And when we gaze over waves today, it is easy to forget we are looking down not at emptiness but at drowned continents, drowned stories. Beneath even calm waters, memory lies buried. Our maps, fixed and certain, are deceiving. The true shape of Earth has shifted endlessly. Could it be, then, that our loneliness, our sense of singular human story, is partly an illusion as well, one created by the rising tide that washed the traces of our companions away? Think of it. Two fires flickering on land that is now seabed, two sets of tools dropped beside rivers that now wind invisibly through mud beneath the North Sea or the Java current. Two voices echoing into the same salt air. When the waters rose, those voices would have been swallowed. Myth, if it carried fragments, survived because it floated inside memory. Stone tools, being heavier, sank and waited. Some may still be there, pressed in silence, waiting for us to listen through sonar, through isotope, through imagination. The ocean held them, and in holding, it reminds us of the fragility of permanence. The sea teaches us that nothing built on land is secure, that even continents can be drowned, that memory itself can be submerged. And yet, as the sea erases, it also preserves. It preserves questions, unanswered. Resting quietly in liquid archives, we will only slowly learn how to read. And yet, if waters can hold whole landscapes of memory beneath their surface, what of memory within us? Could our own identities carry fragments of voices not entirely our own? And yet, if oceans can swallow whole landscapes of memory, perhaps the deeper question lies not beneath water but within us. Not the tools we left behind, nor the soils and isotopes that whisper of vanished tracks, but the lingering puzzle of identity itself. Who are we, if we were never entirely alone? What is me if there is, or once was, an us beside? Philosophy drifts into this space, where bones and soils cannot answer. The question of self has always haunted us. From the first glimpse of our reflections in still pools, to stories of twins, doubles, and shadows, we circle the feeling that any identity might carry traces of another. If another intelligence once walked the same earth at the same time, closer than kin yet different enough to unsettle, how would that proximity have shaped what we now call human? Consider empathy, the bridge between selves. It is not only a human trait. It is survival itself, the instinct to recognize pain, hunger, or joy in another and respond almost as if it were our own. Empathy collapses boundaries. It reminds us that the borders of identity are softer than we think. Perhaps another species forced that empathy into deeper shapes, living side by side with beings not quite the same, yet also not entirely alien, might have expanded compassion beyond recognition. Survival may have depended on it, learning to see others not as threat, not as prey, but as equal carriers of awareness. What happens, then, when identity is entangled? If myths were doubled, if tools intertwined, if climate forced cooperation, then any neat line between us and them begins to unravel. Who invented which idea first? Whose fire taught the other? Which story in the sky belonged to which voice? At some point, the distinction blurs into irrelevance. The culture that takes shape is shared, co-written, interwoven. Perhaps the reason we cannot find clear traces is because those traces were never separate at all. The two were braided, and what was braided cannot so easily be pulled apart. Biology offers shades of this truth. Even our genome is not entirely ours. We carry fragments of Neanderthal DNA, threads stitched into our blood from encounters long past. Modern humans still breathe with lungs, walk with bones, and think with pathways shaped not exclusively by our story, but by intermingling. We are already a chorus of identities layered invisibly inside. Could it be that the very feeling of individuality is less singular than we assume, already an entanglement, already shared? This opens a deeper mystery. If identity is never pristine, then what exactly are we preserving when we say humanity? Memory, tradition, innovation, all of it may have been born in dialogue with others who later disappeared. Our sense of being alone now may be an illusion created by entropy, by loss, by erasure. Entropy takes names, faces, species, and leaves what remains appearing solitary. But that solitude may never have been real. It may only be the shadow left after something larger faded. Imagine the firelight again. One figure tells a story in words we would almost understand. Beside them, another figure answers in a cadence not quite the same. The child listening does not sort them into species or separate the ownership of the myth. They absorb both, carry both into dream. That child grows, teaches others, and soon what was once doubled becomes indistinguishable. Entangled identity flowing forward in memory, carried invisibly into our present. And perhaps that is why separation feels uneasy. We crave dialogue, partnership, love, and understanding, as though somewhere deep in our lineage we remember that our sense of I was once part of a wider we. If there truly was another intelligence that shaped us through friendship, through rivalry, through shared survival, then its voice may still echo inside the architecture of our consciousness. Not tangibly, not provable in artifact, but subtly, trailing within empathy, within the dream of connection that never vanishes. The philosopher might then ask, if who we are was built in relation to another, then who are we now in their absence? Are we incomplete? Are we carrying their silence within us? Or have we become, in ways unseen, both ourselves and them at once, a fusion of memory without awareness of the merger? Identity is not a solid wall but a field of echoes. Even today we absorb the voices of others, reshape them, carry them forward. If a mirror species once walked beside us, identity itself became a shared experiment, its echoes continuing long after their form disappeared. To speak of me or us becomes almost interchangeable across deep time, because each is structured by the other. And yet, if our identities are already entangled to such a degree, then extinction must have left not only silence in the world outside, but silence inside us as well. A silence we still lean toward, as if listening for something just out of reach. Could it be that every question of loneliness is really a remembering of what once was shared? And still, if memory within us is entwined, what of the memories lost entirely, extinction so complete that even the echo is gone? What happens when silence itself is the only voice that remains? If our identities were once entangled, then extinction must have been the unraveling. Every species on Earth lives with this truth. Extinction is the shadow hidden in the fabric of existence. It comes not as an enemy, not as a punishment, but as part of the planet's own long-breathing cycle. Just as mountains rise and erode, rivers carve and vanish, so too do living beings appear and fade. And yet, when we imagine a second intelligence beside us, its extinction is no longer only a scientific inevitability, it becomes personal. It becomes a silence we still feel, as if the earth lost not just a lineage, but a voice in our shared conversation. Throughout geological history, extinction has swept like a tide. Trilobites, ammonites, great reptiles, mammoths, all have gone. The record we study is built as much of absence as of presence. We notice who remains only in light of who didn't survive. But extinction of another mind, another way of thinking, that is something different altogether. If companionship once endured, then its loss would leave traces in more than just fossils. It would linger like an empty seat at the fire, a missing harmony in the song of survival. Perhaps humans endured while their mirror species faltered, outcompete, outlasted, or undone by chance encounters with ice, disease, or hunger. Perhaps their numbers dwindled until one valley fell silent, then another, until the only voice left was ours. The silence would not have descended all at once. It would have been gradual, haunting, fires fewer on the horizon, laughter fading into nights when only one kind of story was told. A partnership dissolved not by betrayal, but by entropy. And in that fading, what might we have carried forward of them, even unknowingly? We may carry their gestures in our myths, their strategies in our instincts, their echoes in our blood. Extinction, after all, does not erase completely. It mutates. It survives as fragments woven into survivors. A song once shared between two species may remain inside us today, not as melody but as metaphor, faint yet persistent. When we repeat archetypes of guardians, tricksters, or shadow companions in our stories, perhaps we are remembering them, transforming their lost presence into memory symbols that outlasted their flesh. In deep time, silence is not absence but testimony. Extinction is recorded not only by the fossils of the gone, but also by the shadows they cast on those who remain. The disappearance of mammoths shaped entire ecosystems, forests regrowing where tundra once spread. The vanishing of ammonites rebalanced the oceans. Each extinction rewrites what follows. If another intelligence slipped away, their loss may have etched itself into our trajectory invisibly, shaping who we became by who we no longer had to answer to. It is as if their silence was placed into our keeping, absorbed into the narrative of who continued. The soil itself remembers extinction. In its strata lie abrupt dark bands where charcoal and ash speak of catastrophe, mass die-offs, sudden change. Scientists trace iridium at the boundary of the Cretaceous, a thin silver line left by a cosmic strike. They recognize absence written as sharp shifts in pollen, a sudden stop in diversity. Silence fossilizes in layers no less surely than bone does. Might there then be undetected silences telling of an intelligence that vanished quietly, without catastrophe, without comet or fire, leaving only the gradual record of absence? To think on this is to feel an ache, because extinction is not simply data. It is loss, final and irreversible. And when paired with imagination of another intelligence, it resonates with something aching in us. The fear of solitude. If once there were two voices and only one remains, we are left carrying not only memory but loneliness. Their silence would haunt us, a reminder of divergence cut short, a partnership ended not in story but in silence. And perhaps the silence itself became part of our making. To feel alone is to search for connection. To sense something missing is to create myths, philosophies, stories that restore a companionship we no longer hold physically. Extinction carves absence into identity. It may be the source of our endless reaching out toward the stars, toward gods, toward imagined beings who might echo us. Perhaps this impulse comes from an older memory, that once, there truly was another who gazed back, and now we cannot rest without longing to replace that missing gaze. The silence left by extinction is profound, but it is not empty. It is ringing, like an echo that continues long after the voice itself has gone. We may never decipher their language, their architecture, their worldview. But in the gaps, in the urge to ask, in the yearning to imagine, we preserve them in another way. The ache is itself a kind of remembrance. To miss them without evidence is still to carry their shadow forward. And so we linger here, with extinction as both eraser and sculptor. It shapes us in absence, carves our narrative by what it removes, and leaves us wondering if perhaps our own identity is the monument to their silence. And yet, if silence itself can endure across ages, what of the dust that falls over time? Could their tools, their traces, their fragments still lie beneath layers, forgotten but not lost, waiting for us to uncover them? And yet, if extinction leaves only silence, then dust is the hand that covers it. Dust does not fall in storms alone. It gathers in layers, fine and patient, as years turn to centuries and centuries to millennia. Beneath its weight, our most fragile traces fade. Tools once struck sharp against stone grow dull, then hidden, then buried entirely. And if there were two sets of hands shaping artifacts, their efforts too would be folded under this quiet shroud. Two paths of invention entwined, dissolving grain by grain into the patience of geology. Consider the fragility of tools. A flint blade, once sharp enough to pierce hide, becomes chipped with use. When dropped, it scatters with others indistinguishable. Would tools decay far faster, crumbling before even one season passes? Fibers woven into traps disintegrate invisibly, reclaimed by soil. What survives into the archaeological record is not a fair representation, but the rare coincidence of stone and circumstance. And even then, dust reclaims it. Wind-blown sands covering an encampment, river floods depositing silt, volcanic ashes sealing a moment in earthy tomb. To imagine two cultures leaving tools side by side is to imagine two conversations carried out in whispers, quickly muffled by Earth's insistence on transformation. When we sift through soil today, we encounter puzzles that are incomplete. Tools appear without context, singular shards without their companions. Entire industries of toolmaking are known only by fragments, broken spear points, flaked scrapers, cores left half-worked and abandoned. Archaeologists assemble meaning from these scraps, naming traditions, sequences, phases. But what if two patterns overlapped? What if, instead of a single technological pulse, there were two streams flowing at once? Different flake angles, different grips, different intentions, all buried beneath the same dust. Our reconstructions would blur them together, mistaking dialogue for solitary invention. Dust does not discriminate, covers equally. A broken human spear point and a tool shaped by another intelligence, lost beside one another on the same hunting plane, would be enfolded together and sealed as one story. In layers thousands of years deep, separation dissolves. And as geologic time advances, the tools themselves crumble. Edges weather, surfaces polish in sediment, fractures fill with minerals. The handprint vanishes. Only a dull shard remains, enough to notice, but not enough to decode its double origin. Erosion works in both directions. It hides and it exposes. Just as winds bury, they also strip. Just as rivers drown, they also uncover. Tools resurface in unexpected places. Plowed fields, cave floors, riverbanks after floods. Yet even when revealed, they are fragmentary, incomplete. They speak, yes, but in whispers. They cannot tell us whether they were one voice or two, one tradition or two, whether these were solitary inventions or the remains of an interwoven chorus. To imagine forgotten tools is to grapple with ambiguity. Clarity dissolved into the patience of stone and loam. Dust is the custodian of deep time, preserves not in perfection but in loss. The most interesting truths may already be buried beyond recovery. Holding a fragment today is like holding the corner of a puzzle whose rest has long since faded. Even when we press microscopes to edges, even when we measure isotopes in residue, we are holding echoes. The past does not return whole. It returns as suggestion. And if there were indeed two sets of tools, their mingling beneath dust means their individuality may be gone forever. Still, in mingling, they tell us something vital, that memory is always layered, and that boundaries between traditions can dissolve without us noticing. Perhaps that is why forgotten tools feel haunting. They tell us not only that we have lost knowledge, but that we may have lost companionship. Every indistinct flake may have once belonged to another hand, another mind, a twin intelligence whose legacy is inseparable from our own. We cannot prove it. We cannot hold more than hints. But in the silence between artifacts, we sense something withheld, something half-buried. And so, the dust teaches us humility. Not all puzzles will be solved. Not all inventions will be assigned their rightful names. Some dissolve into the ground and remain there, undisturbed, waiting not for discovery but for imagination. Because imagination itself is part of the record. In reaching toward possibility, we extend their memory forward through us. And yet, if dust can bury our finest traces, what of dreams? Could the frailest and most immaterial parts of a shared existence, stories born in firelight, visions seen in half-sleep, have survived longer than tools, still whispering inside us today? And yet, if dust can bury tools, the invisible remains far harder to cover. Dreams leave no artifact, no shard or imprint, yet perhaps they endure in another way, woven forward into myth, into imagination, into the restless creativity that still lifts our thoughts beyond the material world. Because to dream is to shape an unseen architecture every bit as real to the dreamer as stone walls or sharpened flint. And if two kinds of minds once sat together in the glow of firelight, their dreams might have met, drifted between them, crossed like shadows dancing in flame. Speculate gently. A Paleolithic night, the campfire burning low, embers glowing orange against the cold. Around it, two species rest, eyes close, breath slows, and then, in the vulnerable silence of sleep, another kind of shaping begins. Not the deliberate blow of stone tool upon stone, but the spontaneous weaving of visions. Dreams of mammoths luminous, larger than in waking. Dreams of rivers flowing uphill, stars bending close, ancestors returning in familiar voices. Perhaps what one species dreamed was shared in morning stories, spoken or gestured, and perhaps the second species replied with their own dream fragments. In this way, firelight saw not only tools exchanged, but myths born, tested, and transformed through the fragile doorway of the sleeping mind. Anthropology whispers of how dreams feed stories. Oral traditions often carry the surreal fingerprints of dreaming, the fluid transformations, the crossings between animal and human, the landscapes imbued with meaning beyond practicality. Dreams create myth as naturally as water creates reflection. So what if myth was once doubled? Two dreaming traditions colliding, shaping myths in dialogue before language itself was even stable. A joint myth-making, fertilized by two imaginations rather than one. To dream together is to acknowledge the soft edges of identity. For dreams ignore the borders of species. In a dream, another face can be yourself. Another voice can speak through your own mouth. Another shape can move as both familiar and other. Dreams dissolve categories the way water dissolves chalk. And in that dissolution, ideas spread. If one child of one lineage dreamed of a sky serpent, and a child of the other dreamed the same motif, then perhaps their communities woke to stories already aligned. Shared dream imagery can migrate quickly, seeded across the flicker of firelight into legends handed down for generations. Perhaps this is why certain symbols feel so eternal. Serpents, tricksters, cosmic rivers, all across the world, they repeat. The psychologist wonders if they arise from the subconscious. The biologist wonders if they stem from shared evolutionary biases. But perhaps they were also carried from encounters between different intelligences. Dream images exchanged in dialogue, implanted across boundaries we no longer remember but still unconsciously echo. In modern science, we turn again to evidence. We know REM sleep connects to memory consolidation, to creativity, to emotional regulation. If another species with intelligence dreamed as we did, then their sleep too would have been a forger of culture, carrying survival knowledge into metaphor, grief into symbol, hunger into story. It is possible our ancestors, listening to the dreams of their mirror companions, adapted some images into their own mythic core. Over time, co-dreaming seeded memory into narrative, so deeply entwined we can no longer tell where it began. To think of this is to realize dreams themselves are a kind of preserved fossil, but etched not in stone, in continuity. Each dream dissolves as morning comes, yet the patterns they feed endure. Myths chain one dream to the next, cultures weaving unconscious fragments into enduring cosmology. If two minds shared that weaving, then we still carry their contribution. Not in bones or blades, but in the dreamlike nature of our metaphors, the surreal leaps that populate every story humanity tells. The campfires are gone, but we still dream. We lie in the dark, our own fires extinguished into electric quiet, and still the visions come. We wake and shape them into poems, paintings, philosophies. It may be that all of this, our creative inheritance, was once magnified by being shared across minds, across species, back in the valleys when every dream was told aloud over embers before sleep fully released. And yet, if dreams could flow so easily across boundaries, if myth was seated jointly by two sleeping intelligences, then what of the blood itself? Might fragments of those companions linger in us still, genetic memory embedded like ghostly voices planted in our very marrow? And yet, if dreams could be shared across firesides, then perhaps something even deeper was shared, something carried forward not in memory, but inside the body itself. Modern science begins to confirm what myth only sensed, that our lineage is not singular, not a pristine line rising unbroken from some solitary origin. It is braided, intricate, an inheritance written in flesh and blood. Modern genomics has revealed this truth with quiet certainty. Traces of Neanderthals linger in us still, subtle fragments of code stitched into our chromosomes, genetic murmurs of embraces and minglings long dissolved in time. We carry their voices in marrow, not audible but persistent, whispering through the expression of a protein, the flicker of an immune response, the shape of a skull. Like ghosts, they inhabit us. What is striking is how natural this is. Evolution, we often imagine, isolates one lineage rising while another falls away. But the evidence tells us otherwise. Lineages overlap, converge, weave together unexpectedly. Hybridity is not the exception, it is the rule. Neanderthal fragments, Denisovan fragments, shadows of others unnamed, all stitched into us like stratified layers of memory beneath a single skin. We are plural beings carrying ancestral echoes that never fully fade. And if those known lineages left us pieces, could there be others, unrecognized, unnamed intelligences, whose code still lingers inside, hidden but not erased? Genetics allows us to trace ancestry like faint trails through deep time. We find sequences of DNA that do not match the expected human variation, patches whose presence demands another origin. These anomalies are called ghost lineages, branches unseen in the fossil record, but undeniably inscribed within us. They are the footprints of the unknown walking silently inside our cells. If another intelligence once lived beside us, one we have yet to discover, then perhaps their legacy remains already inside, whispering through the hidden too, the unassigned sequences we still puzzle over. Their extinction may have been total in body, but not in inheritance. Their story may continue in us, whether we recognize it or not. This thought reframes identity again. For if memory is entangled, so too is biology. There is no precise line where human begins and other ends. The borders of species are porous, blurred like dreams. We are already a living archive of encounters, forged not only in tools, not only in myth, but in molecules themselves. Each breath we take, each survival against disease, each strength we inherit may carry threads donated by cousins we never knew, companions erased from surface memory, yet present still in our marrow. Perhaps this is the most haunting survival, ghosts not wandering around us, but within us. Imagine that some fragment of cognition, some piece of neural wiring shaped by another intelligence, survived by becoming part of our own. Could part of the reason we dream, invent, or tell stories in the ways we do be because long ago, another kind of mind left its residue as genetic contribution? A whisper that persists not as fossil, not as myth, but as the architecture of our living selves. Entropic time tries to erase, but genes resist by passing forward, mutating, persisting where all else disappears. The bones dissolve, the fires die, the myths scatter. But inside us lingers the most intimate conversation, a molecular record of histories no one remembers, voices that may never resurface except as inexplicable patterns in our DNA. To think of this is to remember that ancestry is not singular, but layered. We are never just me, never just us. We are hosts to forgotten families, carriers of ghosts who once walked the same earth but were lost to silence. And here lies a paradox. Science can sequence, map, categorize, but it cannot tell us the emotional shape of this inheritance. It cannot tell us what it felt like when those who gave us fragments still walked the hills and plains. It cannot recover their dreams, their fears, their myths. But perhaps that is precisely why some things feel familiar when they should not, why certain stories, certain images, resonate across all cultures as if planted deeper than time. Genomic whispers may ripple upward into archetypes, unseen influences shaping how we continue to imagine ourselves even now. So the ghosts remain, in marrow, in breath, in thought, extinct yet not entirely gone, forgotten yet unforgettable. They drift within us, waiting to be recognized not as separate, but as part of who we already are. What we call human is not singular. It is a patchwork, a fusion, a palimpsest of minds entangled across deep time. Others are already within us. Others never fully left. And yet, if we are already living archives of lost species, bearing within us ghosts of their existence, then how might our paths of divergence and survival have looked differently if rivers themselves had once split our destinies apart? And yet, if traces of other minds linger hidden within us like ghosts of marrow, then the question remains, how did their paths diverge, and why did ours continue while theirs grew still? To imagine this, we return again to geology's quiet metaphors. The earth does not carve a single river. It branches, it forks, it divides its waters into channels that wander across the land. Some streams dry, others curve back into the main, while a few cut entirely new valleys, carrying their story far from origin. Perhaps intelligence followed a similar pattern, separating from a common current, drifting down different courses until geography itself reshaped identity. Picture the fork of a river. On one side, waters surge outward, expanding across the plain, fanning wide into distant floodplains where life spreads quickly. On the other branch, the course narrows, threading through steep valleys where the current runs deep but does not reach far. So too, perhaps, with minds. One intelligence, the one we call human, expanded outward, crossing mountains, continents, climates. The other may have remained bound to smaller ranges, riversides, deep valleys, its story held locally, its identity shaped by the intimacy of place rather than the ambition of spreading. Geography bends thought as much as climate does. Wide plains encourage mobility, migration, breadth of vision. Enclosed valleys cultivate memory, tradition, cycles circled around again and again until they take on depth rather than breadth. Can we imagine then two intelligences, each reflecting a different geography of the mind? One attuned to vast horizons, innovating on the move. The other attuned to stillness, weaving knowledge into the enduring rhythms of one landscape, one watershed. When rivers fork, they not only carry water, they reshape everything downstream. Two identities may have done the same. Science gives us hints of how landscape directs identity. Isotopes in bone show whether an animal ranges far or stays local. Sediments reveal whether populations followed herds across shifting plains or remained near river valleys rich in fish. We know our ancestors traveled far, reaching every continent save Antarctica by the close of the Ice Age. But what if their counterparts did not? What if another mind chose valley over migration, depth over distance? Their identity would not be less, it would simply be different, anchored rather than restless. Hidden, perhaps, until silenced by the same forces that eventually silence all species. The river image deepens when we look to cultures still tied to place. For those who lived in mountains, knowledge of valleys repeated like memory songs, narrow yet eternal. Those who lived on plains carried a different rhythm. Expansion, reinvention, improvisation. Multiply this divergence across whole intelligences, and we may find the echo of what-ifs in our own philosophies today. Our debates between rootedness and mobility, tradition and innovation, still echo the possibility of two diverging pathways that once were lived realities. Perhaps it is here that identity built itself in contrast. Humans, crossing ranges and seas, may have defined themselves as the adaptable ones, the movers. The mirror species, watching waters run in the same valleys for generations, may have defined themselves as the keepers, the stewards, the ones who remembered what stayed the same. Identities form not only in what we are, but in what the other is not. The fork becomes sharper when comparison exists. Each current shapes its flow against the other, and yet the river still belongs to one watershed. However divergent the channels, they began from the same source. That origin may still whisper in both, similarities we recognize in tools, in fire, in imagination. Over time, geography carved divergence deeper. One river became known, one was lost, but together they taught us that identity is not only self-made. It is shaped by the landscapes we inhabit, and by the companions we measure ourselves against. In thinking on these twin rivers, we return again to the silence of extinction. When one branch dries, the delta narrows. The surviving current carries absence as much as presence. Perhaps we carry the absence of that other flow within us still, the lingering sense that something is missing from the story, that rivers should not be single. And perhaps this is why we imagine others, why we send signals into space, why we dream of dialogue. Because the memory of a river once divided remains unconsciously in us, echoing in our impulse to seek what feels missing. Geology shows us rivers merge again sometimes, after long divergence. Two channels meeting downstream, weaving braids where they rejoin. Could thought too have braided? Could traditions once divided have blended again, leaving us unable to distinguish their origins? If so, what we call human identity may already be a fusion, a downstream mingling of multiple sources. To live at the confluence is to carry both without knowing. And yet, if rivers can diverge, rejoin, and leave faint isotopic signatures of their passage across the land, might not the atoms of bone and soil still hold whispers of these twin journeys? Could isotopes themselves remember where two currents once flowed together, carrying their traces invisibly forward? And yet, if rivers can diverge and identities can split across landscapes, then traces of those journeys must still remain somewhere, buried not in myth or memory, but in the atoms themselves. For the smallest particles preserve what mountains forget. Isotopes, scattered in bone and soil, in glacial ice and ocean mud, are the quiet record keepers of Earth. They remember temperatures, volcanic pulses, the breath of forests gone. They whisper the chemistry of lives extinguished, the cycles of climates endured. If two species once walked beside one another, perhaps their memory lingers less in artifacts than in atomic patterns, fractions of isotopes replicated differently in the things they touched, the fires they lit, the food they ate. Consider how isotopes work as storytellers. Oxygen ratios in seashells reveal the warmth or chill of the waters where it grew. Carbon isotopes in bone feed us the diets of ancient hunters, whether they fed more from grass-fed herds or forest-feeding animals. Nitrogen isotopes shift with the rank of prey, telling us who ate plants, who hunted herbivores, who feasted on near rivals. Each fingerprint is invisible to the eye but clear in the lab, allowing us to listen not to the artifact itself but to what it absorbed. In this way, history becomes chemical memory, as if the Earth left us a coded archive written in its own elements. Now imagine two populations, parallel intelligences living through the same epoch. They may have shared the same plains, the same herds, the same rivers, but no two lives absorb the world in the exact same way. If one species roasted meat over fire fed by hardwood, and the other burned grasses, subtle differences in isotopic soot would settle into soil. If one relied on coastal animals while the other followed inland herds, those divergences too would linger in bone. Perhaps, if we listened closely enough, the isotopes could distinguish not just what was eaten, but who ate it. Two voices, recorded in the same sediment, singing through chemistry instead of words. Scientists today already glimpse anomalies. Some bone signatures point to dietary patterns unexpectedly different from what archaeological layers suggest. Some climate reconstructions show sudden peaks of charcoal soot not easily explained by natural fire. Could these be artifacts of unnoticed populations, minds managing fire differently, spreading their glow across landscapes until the isotopic smoke of their efforts layered into ice and peat? We do not know. We may never know fully. But isotopes invite the question, what if the faint chemistry we study as anonymous is actually double-sourced, once human, once something other? Geology has always blurred lines between destruction and preservation. Volcanic eruptions obliterate life but leave records in sulfur isotopes trapped for millennia in ice. Extinctions come with shifts in carbon layers, sharp drops that remain visible long after the forms themselves vanish. If two kinds of intelligence expanded firelight differently across continents, they would have altered carbon balances, transformed local oxygen levels through forest burning, shifted even trace isotopes held in stalagmites deep underground. Their touch, subtle, would become inseparable from natural cycles, unless we learn how to read their differences. And perhaps this is what makes isotope records poetic, not just scientific. They remind us that silence is not total. Even when bone and tool dissolve, even when myths fade, the very air once breathed and the fires once burned alter the planet in ways that endure. Each isotope is a whisper, carried from the living into the enduring fabric of Earth itself. We may not be able to point and say, this was them. But we can say, someone lived here, someone breathed, someone burned, someone endured. And isn't that, in its own way, enough? Think again of two firesides beneath Ice Age stars. Smoke drifts upward, particles scatter in wind, settle into soil, bind into ice. Tens of thousands of years later, we can no longer see the fires. We cannot hear the laughter, nor the rhythm of songs, nor the dreams traded at dawn. But in the melt of glaciers, in the chemistry of deep cores, faint variations remain. Whispers in isotopes, speaking long after language was silenced. And so, if we dare to listen with humility, perhaps we might one day hear more than one story. Perhaps hidden in chemistry lies evidence of parallel populations, their traces braided together, indistinguishable unless we attend closely. Firelight spread differently, food consumed differently, lives lived differently, but all preserved in the subtle balance of atoms that never forget. And yet, if such whispers still hum within the earth, quiet but enduring, might even the pattern of competition and cooperation be preserved too? Did these minds live as rivals scribing distinct isotopic songs, or as companions weaving themselves into a shared chorus across deep time? And yet, if isotopes still whisper of presence, two fires, two diets, two sets of hands, then the lingering question remains. How did these lives relate to one another? Were they rivals, locked in constant struggles for space and food? Or did they stand side by side in rhythm, improvising survival as if two voices weaving a chorus in deep time? Evolution does not sing us a single song. Its harmonies are layered, and its silences leave space for both stories to echo. We are taught to imagine competition. Species press against one another, resources tighten, and one must win, the other wither. It is a story that the fossil record tells often, through extinctions written like obituaries in stone. Predators shape prey, prey shape predators. Strength defines endurance. But when we turn our thoughts to minds, to beings who carried empathy and language, the story grows more tender and more complicated. Is it possible that rivalry was only part of the story, and that coexistence held as much weight as conflict? Think of the shared plains where herds moved in slow rivers across the landscape. Two species, both intelligent, both inventive, may have greeted each migration differently. Perhaps they did compete, arriving to the kill site within hours of each other, tension simmering in eyes as both tried to claim the same bounty. But perhaps other encounters were more like improvisation. One group drove mammoths into a marsh, weakening them, while the other moved in later, scavenging and learning. In time, each adapted to the other. Evolution works not only by battling, but by entwining. The scientist sees it plainly in ecosystems that remain today. Wolves and ravens sharing kills, each shaping the other's behavior. Lions and hyenas, enemies, still learn from each other, adjusting hunts to avoid clash when possible. Might we, too, have once existed in this blurred zone, where sometimes the story was rivalry, and sometimes the story was chorus? Could two kinds of intelligence have shaped one another's strategies, each an audience and a teacher in a dialogue as old as time? Archaeological evidence does little to settle the question. Some sites suggest competition. Tools overlapped, hunting grounds strained. But gaps allow other readings too. Patterns of survival stretched farther than expected, as if knowledge was shared, as if certain techniques blossomed more rapidly than one lineage alone might have invented. These faint traces leave the story open, balanced between rivalry and resonance. Perhaps both were true. Perhaps they shifted with weather, with generations, with circumstance. The metaphor of music helps us feel this uncertainty. Species may have been instruments in the same symphony. At times, their notes clashed, loud, dissonant, unresolvable. At others, they carried each other subtly, one echoing the rhythm begun by the other. When the environment turned harsh, the dissonance may have grown louder. When resources opened, perhaps the chorus returned. Like any song carried through improvisation, the music was never fixed. It unfolded moment by moment, leaving no complete score for us to read now. What is remarkable is that we still seek this answer with wonder rather than closure. Something in us hopes they were not only rivals. Something longs for the possibility that existence could have been more than struggle. To believe in the chorus is to believe that the human story once carried harmony wider than the self, as if echoes of another voice still hum quietly, reminding us that collaboration once shaped survival just as strongly as competition did. Consider how this question reshapes identity. If we say we triumphed, we define ourselves as victors of rivalry. If we say we coexisted, we define ourselves as inheritors of shared wisdom, companions of a vanished teacher. Both possibilities carry weight. Both might be true at different times, in different valleys, under different skies. Perhaps all that remains certain is that the earth itself absorbed the resonance of both. A song of friction and of friendship, carried invisibly into the record of soils, fossils, whispers in isotopes. Evolution rarely chooses simplicity. Rivers diverge, histories interweave, extinctions carve silence, while others endure. The echo left for us is ambivalence, mystery, a widening wonder rather than a firm conclusion. And maybe this is the greater gift, that the question itself compels us to listen more deeply, to hear in our own lives the balance of rivalry and chorus that still shapes how we endure together to this day. So we rest here, leaning softly into the uncertainty. Were they our competitors, pressing against us for scarce horizons? Or were they our collaborators, holding with us a larger harmony? The truth may have been both. An improvisation that lasted until one voice fell silent, and the other carried forward, humming still. And yet, if there was once the possibility of twin civilizations building side by side, not only hunting or dreaming together but raising entire cities in shared light, then what architectures might they have left behind for stone and soil to remember? And yet, if survival once played like an improvisation between rivals and companions, then what of the worlds they might have built together? What of entire civilizations rising side by side, not only in firelight or shared hunts, but in the stone and clay of cities? Imagine this not as myth nor as proof, but as possibility. A future that might have unfolded if two intelligences had nurtured agriculture and writing together, weaving parallel architectures, parallel sciences, parallel dreams into landscapes now long gone. Civilization itself begins with the soil, seeds pressed into furrows, rivers diverted with patient hands. Agriculture transforms not only diets, but identities. Humans learned this slowly, tethering themselves to the stability of crops instead of the wild abundance of herds. But what if another species had been there as well? Standing across the same river plains, plotting not in isolation but in dialogue. Two perspectives might have reshaped farming into something stranger, perhaps more sustainable. Where one saw efficiency, the other might have seen balance. Where one perfected irrigation channels, the other preserved forest edges, creating an early chorus between innovation and restraint. Signs of such dual agriculture could have left subtle marks in the soil, different pollen grains layered side by side, isotopic records of two diets feeding from the same earth. An agriculture birth settlement. Permanent dwellings, storage pits, places where fire no longer belongs only to the night. If two intelligences constructed together, perhaps their architectures blended, their visions of space layered. Imagine streets flanked by two kinds of homes, one rising upward in stacked arrangements, the other wide and low, pressed harmoniously into the earth. Imagine temples, one echoing with human chants, another with voices unfamiliar but resonant, built close enough that the sounds converged across plazas. A city, then, becomes not simply walls and roofs, but a dialogue written in stone and timber. What of writing? Our scripts, carved first into clay and bone, captured transactions, rituals, myths. A second way of thought might have chosen another path, shapes more fluid or symbolic or non-linear, inscribed in materials we did not preserve. Their records could exist still, dissolved into fragments mistaken for scratches, dismissed as natural striations. Yet if voices were exchanged, then writing itself might have been born as a fusion, not invention from one mind alone. Perhaps our earliest marks already carry artifacts of two authorships fused so deeply we can no longer separate them. And then, sciences, parallel observation shaping knowledge. Humans measuring stars for calendars and navigation, while their counterparts sought other rhythms, tracking the slow growth of forests, reading isotopes in rivers long before we had the words for it, listening to cycles with a patience beyond our own. Twin sciences carried into one world might have broadened what knowledge could mean, leaving us with a technofossil record richer than the one we now search for. But if it once existed, geology may already have hidden it. Stone blocks reburied, wooden structures long gone, knowledge dissolved into silence. The traces, if they remain, may be folded into sediments that look no different from natural layers. Technofossils remind us that civilizations announce themselves in matter. Plastics, alloys, altered isotopes. Future geologists will see our Anthropocene clearly. But what if we are not the first to leave such a signal? What if remnants of structures already lie below, folded into strata so old we mistake them for volcanic flows or patternless rockfall? If agriculture once reshaped landscapes in tandem, its lines of irrigation now lie drowned on continental shelves. If their sciences birthed strange alloys or pigments, perhaps they have already become dust, indistinguishable from minerals. Working together, they could have left monuments too subtle for us to recognize, too erased by entropy to distinguish from natural form. And yet, the thought lingers. Could technofossils of two minds still breathe faintly in Earth's memory, waiting to be understood not as anomaly but as duet? Speculation invites humility here. For while we move forward imagining futures of interstellar travel, the great experiment of two species building side by side may already have been attempted on Earth, long ago, and then erased. The possibility reminds us that civilization itself is fragile, no matter how high its walls, no matter how enduring its stone. What we call permanence may only be a brief breath in geologic time. Still, the question comforts even as it unsettles. What if our inventions, our myths, our very architectures are already co-creations, the outcome of dialogues now forgotten? Cities of two minds might have vanished physically, but echoes of such partnership could still hum in archetypes, in recurring ideas of companionship, in the deep human longing never to be alone. And yet, if memory can live both in stone and in us, then perhaps the greatest archive is not in cities at all, but in the stories and archetypes we carry. For cultures remember in more ways than walls. What memories, then, could we still be carrying within ourselves? And yet, if cities of two minds might once have risen on this earth, then part of their legacy would not only rest in stone. Stone preserves, yes, it holds the shape of blades, the flare of hearths, the lines of walls. But stone forgets the invisible. Stone cannot carry feelings, archetypes, gestures of kindness, or the haunting shape of myth. For that, memory required a different vessel, us. The human mind itself may be the last archive of what companionship with another intelligence felt like, even after artifacts dissolved into dust. Memory in us is not precise. It does not keep dates as geology does. It carries echoes. It repeats in archetypes, recurring patterns that return across cultures, across languages, across generations. Psychologists see them as structures of the mind. The wise teacher who arrives with knowledge beyond their years, the trickster who disrupts order but forces growth, the silent watcher who stands at the edge of the camp. Where did these figures come from? Why do they appear everywhere, from ancient cave paintings to modern epics, even in cultures with no shared ancestry of storytelling? Perhaps because they are older than writing, older than any single lineage. Could they, in fact, be faint memories of what it was like to live beside another kind of mind? Imagine the archetype of the wisdom teacher. So often this figure is not human, but something between worlds, a being slightly other, wiser than the community, guiding but never fully belonging. What if this memory came from encounters with another intelligence, one who saw differently, who thought along another path, who at times showed us skills we did not know? Such meetings, retold and mythologized, might have seeded the recurring shape, persisting long after their source was gone. Or the trickster. This figure crosses boundaries, dissolves categories, disrupts certainty. If another species lived close to us, not quite kin and not quite stranger, their presence itself may have embodied this archetype. They would have been a boundary walker, a being between, showing us that the line between human and other is not eternal but porous. In stories that still carry tricksters as coyote, raven, or shapeshifter, perhaps we hear echoes of a relationship that was once real, once tangible, remembered now only through imagination. And then there is the watcher, the figure at the margins, silent, observing, always there but rarely intervening. Eyes in the shadow, a presence both unsettling and comforting. Jung calls this an archetype of the self meeting its other. But what if it is simpler than that? What if long ago there really were watchers at the forest edge? Our companions, our cousins, existing just enough apart to always be visible, never gone, never entirely ours. Their absence could have become myth's silence, the archetype of someone unseen but still felt. Stone preserves the body of history. We can touch a flake, measure the strike that made it, know the hand was steady. But memory in us preserves its spirit. We cannot measure archetypes, yet they endure more firmly than stone. Myths live longer than monuments, carried mouth to mouth even when temples crumble. If another intelligence's presence left its shape in our stories, then stone and psyche alike are parallel archives. Hard record and soft echo, geology and imagination, telling fragments of one intertwined truth. What is strange is how archetypes resist extinction. Civilizations collapse, species vanish, but the same dream forms return. Always the teacher, always the trickster, always the watcher. As if memory has become autonomous, no longer tied to its origin but still unfolding across us. One might say we invented them. Another might say we inherited them, not biologically, as with DNA, but psychologically, as with companions whose shadows still ripple through imagination. Memory in us can be as deep as memory in stone. Perhaps this is why stories seem older than we are. A child somewhere invents a myth of a guide who knows more than anyone they've met. A poet dreams a figure with fox-like cunning who bends truth. A painter imagines an eye above humanity watching calmly. We assume these are singular acts of creativity. But what if they are recollections, disguised as invention? Faint, unconscious memories of living alongside others, told again as symbols because direct memory has eroded. Archetypes become the fossils of imagination, remnants not of bodies, but of relationships. And so we feel the possibility arise again. We are never alone when we dream. Someone is always echoing at the edges. Just as stone holds fragments of their tools, perhaps our interior landscapes still carry fragments of their presence, coded not in minerals but in metaphor. Both archives endure, though both imperfectly. The earth holds memory in matter. We hold it in myth. And yet, if we preserve in ourselves these echoes of dialogue, then perhaps even conflict, too, is remembered, not as blood and bone, but as shadows of debate. Could fossils themselves show us the argument carved in stone, tools layered as if in conversation, pressing their voices even into the silence of geology? And yet, if our myths and memories carry echoes of another presence, then their greatest trace may not be in what we find, but in what we do not. Absence itself becomes a kind of presence. It lingers like an imprint in the air after music has stopped, a hollow resonance that seems to surround us even when nothing is left to see. In paleontology and geology, absences are as telling as discoveries. They shape questions more profoundly than any artifact can. And when we search for other intelligences alongside us and do not find them, what we hold is not clarity but silence, an ocean of absence. Absence is not emptiness, but shape. A missing fossil in a lineage tells us of extinction. A gap in sediment layers tells us of catastrophic erosion or flood. Even ice cores, with their steady bands of climate history, carry absence in moments of abrupt loss. Bubbles gone missing, a layer erased by melting. The Earth teaches us that silence, too, holds memory. To study absence is to study the traces of what no longer remains. Could the unseen companions we imagine leave behind their legacy not in stones or genes but in these very silences? Consider the archaeological record. Tools appear, then vanish, then reappear again. Caves show sudden bursts of creativity, then long stillness. What do we make of these stutters in the record? Are they evidence of lost populations, or merely chance survival of evidence? Archaeologists call these lacunae, moments where nothing remains to be found. But what if some of these are not chance gaps? What if they are absences carved by whole cultures that once thrived beside us, erased so thoroughly by rivers, seas, and time that all that is left is the gap itself? Geology carries countless oceans of absence. Submerged landscapes like Doggerland or Beringia hold no visible cities, no clear monuments, and yet we know they carried life. The absence of ruins, there is not proof of emptiness, but of drowning. Similarly, in valleys scoured by glaciers, missing eras are marked not by presence but by the polished silence of granite scraped clean. Could the absence of evidence of another intelligence be such a silence, washing over us from every floodplain, every coast, every memory eroded by ice? Absence haunts us differently than presence. It forces the mind to fill in what the earth withholds. When we do not find them, we imagine them. When fossils fail us, we supply the picture of what they might have been. This is not deception, it is continuity. Our imagination insists on completing what absence presents as incomplete. And in that act of wonder, absence becomes presence all over again. Perhaps this is part of why the desire to believe in others, intelligences once or even still existing, is so enduring for humanity. The silence itself provokes longing. It points at a hollow space shaped as if to fit another voice, compelling us to lean into the void with questions. What if emptiness is the strongest evidence of all, that we feel their absence not only as a lack of discovery but as a presence in itself, pressing on us with the quiet weight of something missing? In the sciences, we learn to interpret absence, the gaps in bone that signal lost tissue, the voids in volcanic rock where gas once pressed and then vanished. To the geologist, absences are not without story. They are stories themselves, whispered as blankness. When we do not find our echoes of another species, perhaps the silence is its own geological record, an imprint of vanished companionship carried forward as a resonance of loss and wonder alike. Absence becomes more haunting the farther into deep time we peer. We find coral reefs fossilized yet missing whole lineages of fish. We uncover great forests preserved in stone, their voices absent, their creatures erased. Each absence adds to the hollow chamber of curiosity. And so with the possibility of another intelligence. We may never uncover their monuments, never decode their myths from stone, never hold their bones in museum light. But their absence, a hollow echo carved into the record, still shapes our imagination as profoundly as any fossil in stone. Perhaps this is their truest legacy, to remain unseen, yet to be felt, to be missing, yet impossible to forget. For absence itself can endure longer than presence. It becomes a presence of its own, a quiet haunting carved through time, reminding us gently of what could have been, what may have been, what still lingers at the very edge of possibility. And yet, if absence itself becomes a kind of presence, then perhaps the earth itself holds them still, folded secretly into layers of patience, waiting for us to uncover them in places where stone weaves silence into transformation. And yet, if absence itself can be a presence, then perhaps we must turn our attention to the one keeper that preserves and erases all with equal care, the earth itself. For the earth is patient, far more patient than us, far more patient than memory or myth. It moves on a scale that makes even whole civilizations brief sparks in the dark. Mountains rise, then fall. Oceans sweep in and retreat again. Forests cover hills and are stripped away, only to grow again. And in every shift, every folded layer, the planet carries whatever has touched it, organism, artifact, or echo, forward into transformation. Geology is the discipline of this patience. It reminds us that stone is never truly still. It bends under pressure, fractures under strain, folds under the weight of time. What we call permanence is, in reality, only a stage of transformation. What we build, what we bury, what we leave behind, all of it is drawn into the slow cycle of Earth's recycling, smoothed and altered until we cannot tell where history ends and where rock begins. If two intelligent species lived here, if they built, if they dreamed in stone, then their remains are not absent. They are only metamorphosed, pressed invisibly into mountainsides, recycled into continents beneath our feet. Consider how plate tectonics works. Crust is carried into subduction zones, drawn down beneath ocean trenches into the fire of the mantle. In that descent, sediments are melted, reformed, stripped of their memory. Bones, cities, tools, monuments, everything becomes mineral, everything becomes indistinct. Then, through uplift, volcanic birth, and mountain building, that same recycled matter returns to the surface, reborn as new landscapes. The ruins of the forgotten may be in the Alps, in the Andes, in the Himalaya, hidden, unrecognizable, their identity blended into crystalline quartz and folded schist. The earth has not lost them. It has simply remade them into itself. Metamorphic rock is perhaps the most haunting of all reminders. When limestone is pressed into marble, when shale is transformed into slate, when granite is altered under unimaginable forces, what happens to the histories within? Fossils are erased, artifacts are obliterated. All structure of memory is released, replaced with purity of mineral. And yet, even here the whisper remains, an absence that feels deliberate, a stone that feels clean because it has been made out of something too full to preserve. If once there were ruins, standing walls, or carved symbols, they could be hidden within such rock, erased but not gone, rewritten into geology itself. This is the long patience of Earth, a patience that carries everything forward, but only in altered form. Sometimes we glimpse this through anomalies, strange minerals where life once flourished, unexplained metamorphosed structures that seem almost like architecture distorted by pressure. Perhaps we dismiss them as coincidence. Perhaps that is all they are. Yet the thought lingers. Might some of the polished stones we walk upon today be the final form of abandoned walls, bones, or artifacts pressed so deeply into the crust they can no longer reveal themselves as anything but Earth's own body? The Earth whispers through its movements. Volcanoes bring up matter drawn down long before. Mountains rise carrying sediments deposited by oceans that drowned whole epochs. To stand before a mountain is to stand before a book rewritten countless times, its earlier pages melted and pressed illegible. But even illegibility is a clue. It says, "A story once lived here, though I cannot show you the words." If two species shared this planet in parallel, their traces may still surround us, unrecognizable, present only as folded landscapes we mistake for purely natural. There is a certain humility in this realization. All our searching, our careful excavation, takes place in the uppermost skin of Earth. Beneath us lies vast depth, billions of years of transformation, most of it inaccessible, much of it obliterated. We will never know its entirety. But perhaps that is the lesson. Earth does not hurry. It does not keep the record for us. It remakes itself, patient, erasing detail but holding essence. The quiet truth that all things return to its body. And so, if another intelligence once lived and built here, their ruins may already be part of the continents themselves. They are not gone. They are earth. They are mountains, they are marble, they are slate, they are dust folded into every storm. The long patience of stone has absorbed them, just as it will someday absorb us. And yet, if the earth has folded memory into silence, reshaping every relic into rock, could the fragile art they left, their harmonies, their music, have escaped longer than their monuments? Might forgotten songs still echo faintly where stone has silenced all else? And yet, if the earth itself has folded ruins and tools back into stone, erasing even the strongest monuments, something softer may have lingered longer. For not everything leaves its trace in stone. Some things move invisibly, carried by air, by memory, by the body itself. Music is one of these. More fragile than architecture, more fleeting than tools, it still endures in us, surviving not as artifact but as inheritance. And so we may wonder, what if our music still carries shadows of another intelligence? What if rhythms and resonances were shaped not by one species alone, but by two, an ancient duet, half lost yet still echoing inside every drumbeat, every rise of voice? It is difficult to imagine a people without music. Even before writing, before cities, before stone walls were raised, there were songs, chants, tones folded into ritual and survival alike. Rhythms soothed children, carried memories, ordered labor, summoned meaning where words faltered. It may be one of the oldest expressions of consciousness, a way to reach one another across silence. And if we humans found it, might not others as well? If another intelligence lived beside us, perhaps they too shaped sound into pattern, into pulse, into form. Perhaps their voices joined ours, tangled in firelight long ago, forming harmonies that neither alone could have invented. Consider rhythm itself. The heartbeat is its first teacher. Breath provides its second. Both species, human and other, would have carried these same biological metronomes within their bodies. To drum is only to externalize what already repeats inside. But timbre, resonance, these are choices of culture. Where one voice might favor deep drumming tones, another might vibrate higher, thinner, more delicate. Two together could create a fuller chorus, layering textures in ways a single kind never could. Could it be that early music, before it hardened into tradition, was already shaped by more than one intelligence, remnants of collaboration still echoing in the archetypes of song? Across the world, traditions of music return to similar patterns. The beating drum, the chant, the whistle of bone flutes. Why such consistency? Some say it is biology. Some say it is convergence. But could some of it be inheritance, from deeper influences that no longer have names? If another species taught us tones or joined our voices in rhythm, those traces may remain now not as instruments to excavate but as patterns in our collective art. Perhaps this is why certain intervals, certain repetitions, feel older than awareness itself, lingering in the body as if remembered rather than invented. The philosopher might ask, if music is a memory, then whose memory do we carry? For while the stone walls are gone, the songs are still here. We dance without knowing why. We repeat refrains older than language. We lean into rhythm as if it were our oldest inheritance. This persistence, this universality, suggests that music may be carrying more than simply human tradition. It may be carrying fragments of something shared, a duet from an age where more than one mind shaped sound as connection. Think of how resonance works. Strike a drum on one side of the plane, and a body attuned to rhythm can feel it on the other. Sound travels invisibly, an unseen thread knitting spaces together. Perhaps once, our voices responded to others who are now gone, returning not rivalry but harmony. The memory of that harmony may survive in us more deeply than in tools or bones. For while stone is ground into metamorphic silence, rhythm can survive in blood and breath, retold unconsciously by every new generation. To imagine this is not only poetic, it is humbling. For if our music is not entirely ours, then even in loneliness we are not alone. Each note could carry shadows of lost companionship. Each song could be resonant with a vanished partner. Our voices, raised in harmony, may already be echoes of two species singing once together, the memory braided so tightly we no longer know where one begins and the other ends. And so, even if civilizations are erased, myths fragmented, tools reduced to dust, perhaps music is the ghost most likely to endure. Not recorded in fossil, but rehearsed in us endlessly, improvised again every time a voice rises into air. Forgotten, half lost, and yet still faintly carried forward like the resonance of a struck bell, long after the bell itself is gone. And yet, if harmonies can endure longer than stone, then perhaps even the very artifacts of technology, the technofossils of dual invention, may someday tell their story to geologists of the far future. What resonance, then, could Earth's strata still hold of them? And yet, if music can outlast stone in rhythm and memory, what of the stone we ourselves have altered, the new kinds of matter we have pressed into the earth as artifacts of our presence? Modern science calls them technofossils, the geological echoes of technology. Unlike a shell or a bone, they are not born from biology but from culture. Plastics hardened into shapes that never dissolve completely. Alloys fused from elements that rarely meet in nature. Radioisotopes sprinkled across continents from wars and reactors, enduring for tens of thousands of years. These are our planetary fingerprints woven into future strata. And if two intelligences once coexisted, both shaping their own tools, their own matter, their own wastes, what kind of layered record would they have left behind for deep time to carry forward? Technofossils are strange markers because they do not vanish easily. A pipeline rusts away, yes, but traces of its composite metals will still remain in soil. Plastic fragments erode into grains smaller than sand, but resist fully dissolving, embedding themselves in beaches, sediments, seafloor muds. Concrete crumbles into dust, but its chemical signature, its precise mixture of calcium, silica, and lime, remains distinct from natural rock. Already, geologists say, the Anthropocene will be visible millions of years from now. Our material decisions will become a stratum every bit as recognizable as the iridium layer left by the great asteroid at the end of the Cretaceous. Now imagine if two species, not one, co-created. Their technologies might have diverged in form, ours heavy with metals and fire, theirs perhaps softer, organic, fibrous. Or perhaps both learned metallurgy, but chose different alloys, different methods of shaping stone into function beyond nature's usual toolset. What would a deep core reveal then? Layered strata marked not by one tradition, but two interleaving signatures of different ingenuity. A puzzle contradictory at first glance. One deposit of alloys consistent with fire forges, another nearby in time, of artifacts hardened through pressures or chemistries we would not recognize as human. Future geologists might puzzle at these twin voices in strata, hearing not a singular Anthropocene but a duet of civilizations pressed together into the same geologic volume. If one intelligence created plastics as we did, and the other favored natural composites hardened through resins or plant fibers, then traces of both could still co-occur. One sediment layer might show microplastics, indelible across oceans. Another could reveal organic polymers fossilized into patterns indistinguishable from certain resins, yet too abundant, too uniform, to be the product of forests alone. Could it be that even now, locked within some overlooked deposit, there remains a technofossil not of us, not of our ancestors, but of a parallel us that once wove technology into the crust in its own way? The notion is unsettling. We walk across Earth assuming its anomalies are purely geological. Strange crystals formed deep underground, alloys created by lightning strike, peculiar mineral seams deposited by volcanoes. But what if some of these anomalies are technofossils too old for us to recognize as such? Not melted cans or ceramics from our kind of fire, but hardened glass-like substances pressed in kilns we never built. Not our waste alone, but theirs, reinterpreted by us today as useless curiosity. We may already have dismissed them. That is the haunting possibility of technofossils. They blend into geology so seamlessly that without context, purpose is indistinguishable. And yet, technofossils, unlike myth or music, cannot be erased as entirely. They function as time's stubborn artifacts, industrial fossils beyond decay. If two intelligences once converged in time, their traces could be pressed into the same layers, layered sediments announcing their duet even to scientists of the far future, even to beings who might inherit Earth long after us. To them, the Earth's crust might read less like a single melody and more like a harmony, two voices captured in mineral permanence. In this light, the Anthropocene becomes not only our invention but perhaps our repetition. We are not unique in inscribing technology into geology. We are only among the few whose layer remains visible now. Others, if they were, may already have been recycled into stone by Earth's long patience. Their technofossils may have been pressed too deep, folded into metamorphic rock that appears too ancient, its purpose melted away. It is sobering to think that even we, with all our metals, plastics, and isotopes, will one day be layered into this same silence. One day, the cities of our age will be forgotten in detail, remembered only in chemistry. Yet in that fate we find kinship with the speculative others, their technofossils erased, ours momentarily visible, both destined eventually to dissolve into the churn of geology. Perhaps this is what connects us to them. The knowledge that to exist is to shape the earth, and to shape is to be remembered imperfectly, as residue rather than as monument. Strata do not tell full stories. They tell of layers overlapping, of memory thickened until all voices blur together. And yet, if technofossils are the most enduring testimony, then perhaps what matters is not what survives, but how it joins the silence. What question, then, will Earth's final layers leave when even our most durable creations are folded back into stone? And yet, if technofossils thread our future into geology, leaving us layered into stone alongside speculation of what once may have been, one question remains above all others. A question older than science, but not diminished by it. A question whispered in every culture, every myth, every ache of longing that awakens beneath the quiet sky. Are we truly the only? This question does not fade. It moves like a current beneath all discovery, present whether we gaze backward into deep time or outward toward distant stars. Our sciences are formidable. We hold isotope records, DNA fragments, fossil webs viewed under careful light. But answers are not always where our tools reach. The truth may forever linger just beyond reach, not in what is proven but in what compels us to ask again and again. Could there have been others? Could they have laughed, built, remembered, and dreamed? Could they have shaped myths that somehow entered ours, blurred until indistinguishable? Entropy works against us. It erases. It disperses fragments of tools into dust, crumbles bone into mineral trace, folds landscapes into silence. The farther we peer into the past, the more entropy grows visible, the breaks between layers, the gaps in records, the absences that outnumber presences. If anything lived beside us with memory and thought, entropy ensures its story is almost gone. And yet, curiosity always revives it, like grass rising through cracks in old stone. We return to the question precisely because we do not have the answer. Perhaps that is the essence of the human condition. We inhabit mystery as much as truth. The absence of certainty expands our imaginations farther than certainty ever could. We ask not only because the past is incomplete, but because incompleteness itself shapes who we are. If we were truly alone throughout all of time, the question would not persist. Its persistence hints at something else. A trace, faint but powerful, that solitude has not always defined us. Think of the silence of extinction. Think of the echoes preserved in myths, in archetypes, in rhythm and song. Each is a fragment that points beyond itself, suggesting conversation as much as isolation. Imagine if even a handful of their genes linger in our bodies, even a handful of their dream motifs echo in our myths, even a handful of their soot traces remain in ice. Would that handful not be enough to say the question has already been answered, though quietly, though invisibly? Science calls us to restraint. It reminds us that speculation must not be confused with certainty. And yet, wonder calls us to openness. The two together form a balance. One careful, one hopeful, both necessary. For the question of whether we were ever more than one is not just scientific. It is existential. It defines how we see ourselves as solitary or as once partners now carrying forward the memory of silence. The question grows wider when we extend it outward. If not here, then elsewhere. If not Earth, then perhaps among planets circling their quiet suns. We look to them with the same ache we cast backward into prehistory, fueled by the same question. Are we the only? And because the Earth has already recycled so many stories, we are never sure whether the silence is proof of absence or only the work of entropy. Perhaps that is why we tell these stories slowly, letting them linger in the night. The Earth whispers no conclusion, and so we lean toward questions as our truest inheritance. Open-ended, continuous, unfinished. Even when we lie down to sleep, our thoughts circle back, compelled by mysteries we cannot fully name. This is how the question survives the erasing hand of entropy. It does not rely on preservation in stone or molecule, but in curiosity's refusal to end. Across deep time, species have risen and vanished. Landscapes have been drowned, uplifted, consumed. Stars themselves burn out in patience. And still, one question travels forward, loosening none of its power. Were we ever truly alone? And yet, if questions echo louder than answers, then in the silence between those echoes we must return to reflection. Dust will gather. Time will fold. Mirrors will cloud. What, then, becomes of us when even the memory of others is gone and only our reflection remains? And yet, if the question lingers louder than any answer, then so too must the image of its fading. For every reflection, no matter how clear, eventually gathers dust. Picture it softly, a mirror left in an empty room. At first, it reflects brightly, showing every detail, every gesture. But with time, particles settle, grains accumulate, and the sharpness of what once was begins to blur. The reflection is not gone. It is only hidden, veiled by layers so fine we might mistake them for absence. Perhaps this is how the memory of another intelligence has slipped from us. Dust covers the mirror species, whether lost forever or still waiting unseen. But dust is not destruction. It is preservation of another kind. Geologists know this well. Dust carried by wind settles into layers, compacting over centuries into loess, into soil that nourishes future generations. Dust blown from deserts travels oceans, seeding plankton blooms that sustain life far away. Even volcanic ash, initially choking the sky, locks into stone that preserves the moment for millions of years. Dust is both an ending and a promise. It covers, but it also keeps. So if the memory of another civilization lies beneath, then dust may not be its eraser, but its archivist. Imagine tools left in a camp long abandoned, artifacts buried shallowly by shifting sands. Centuries pass, winds move grains, floods lay down silt. Eventually, all that remains visible is landscape pure and unbroken. Yet under the weight of dust, the tools survive in silence, their edges dulled but intact, their stories waiting for rediscovery. Could the same be true of the mirror species? Covered so completely by the sediment of time that they appear gone, yet quietly preserved, inviting us to look again? Dust is also symbolic of forgetting, of memory slipping into haze. We use the word in stories to mean neglect, death, disappearance. But here, in the realm of deep time, dust holds another meaning. It is patience. It assures that what once was does not vanish instantly but rests in waiting. A mirror covered in dust may seem opaque until someone brushes it clean, unveiling once again the image beneath. Perhaps the question, are we truly the only? Endures because somewhere, in some form, such a brushing is still possible, the awakening of reflection long hidden. And what of that reflection? Would it resemble us so closely that we feel familiarity, or differ enough that we gasp in strangeness? The mirror is never identical. It bends light slightly, distorts edges, shifts perspective. To imagine another intelligence as a mirror species is to accept they would not be the same as us. They would reflect us while showing perspectives we alone could never perceive. Dust's covering then is a double silence. It hides, but it also promises depth if cleared away. Our own existence testifies to this. So much of history lay beneath layers when first uncovered. Fossils mistaken for stones, bones misread as debris, civilizations rediscovered under desert dunes only when dust finally lifted. The patience of dust ensures that preservation and forgetting go hand in hand. Perhaps the mirror species still lingers as a layer under the accumulation of entropy. Perhaps one day, by accident or design, we will brush away enough grains to glimpse them once again. Not living, but remembered, still capable of teaching us through their residue. In that light, dust becomes comforting. Its slow accumulation feels less like a smothering and more like a veil, a silence that protects until the time is right to see anew. We may grieve the thought that another intelligence fell to silence, but dust assures us, silence is not annihilation. Silence is preservation waiting for recognition. Dust settles not to erase, but to keep. And so, the image lingers, the mirror of companionship once bright, now dimmed beneath ages of deposition. We cannot quite see, but we still sense. And sensing, we wonder. Perhaps that is the gift. Dust inviting us endlessly to look again, to pass a hand across the surface, to discover that some things do not vanish as easily as we fear. And yet, when the dust finally settles on us, too, what then will remain in silence? What reflection will future eyes discover when our own layer becomes the mirror? And now, as our journey drifts toward its end, we return to where we began, with a question, and with the silence that holds it. For if we were never alone, then perhaps we are still not. The silence of earth need not mean emptiness. It may mean something softer, something larger, a space in which memory continues even when all voices seem to have withdrawn. Silence, in this light, is not the absence of story, but its deepest ground. We have wandered through soil, through bone, through rivers and isotopes, through myths and technofossils. We have listened to echoes and dreams, to shadows preserved in extinction, to the weight of patience pressed into the crust itself. At every turn we found the same paradox, traces too faint to be decisive, and yet compelling enough to stir wonder. The earth does not give us certainty. It gives us questions and the invitation to listen longer. Picture the stillness of a night plain, stars scattered overhead, the fire slowly dimming. Around it, only the pulse of our thoughts, the quiet rhythm of breath. In moments like this, silence feels alive, like a presence leaning close rather than an absence withdrawing away. Perhaps deep time itself works this way. When species vanish, they do not abandon the story. They fold back into silence, carried forward invisibly. If another intelligence once walked beside us, their silence is not empty. It is woven into the fabric of our own being, carried in memory, in myth, maybe even within our very blood. Silence can be companionship in its own way. Just as a friend sitting beside us in quiet can speak more through their presence than through words, the earth's silence may still carry what we cannot hear directly. The missing fires, the unrecorded dreams, the vanished cities, all may still resonate in the spaces between what remains. Curiosity allows us to hear those resonances, faint though they are, and to let them shape us without the need for certainty. There is a humility that comes with this recognition. We are used to thinking that what endures must be visible. Stone tools, carved bones, ruins rising against time. But perhaps the most enduring memory of all is silence itself. A silence that does not erase but protects. A silence that waits. To sit with it gently is to realize we are never truly solitary. For silence is a companion, and within its folds, maybe all that was once here endures in ways we cannot yet name. And so we arrive here, at the threshold where science and wonder meet. Were we ever truly the only ones? The earth withholds its answer, but the question alone has been enough to shape us, to push us deeper into inquiry, into imagination. Perhaps we will never find their bones, never hear their myths, never uncover their cities. Perhaps entropy has claimed more than we can retrieve. But the possibility remains, and that possibility has become a presence in itself, an echo that will not fade. If their fires once burned beside ours, then they have become part of our lineage, remembered or not. If their songs once mingled with ours, then their rhythm still beats faintly in us. If their tools once struck stone beside our own, then their touch is joined with ours in the geology of the earth. And if all of these are only maybes, then even the maybe is enough. For curiosity transforms uncertainty into companionship. In asking, in wondering, we bring them nearer again. The silence of earth is vast, but it is not without memory. It is not without presence. When rivers bury, when glaciers erase, when mountains fold and grind, something remains, however faint, however hidden. The silence does not empty, it holds. And if we soften our attention, if we move as slowly as the planet itself does, we may feel that holding as a kind of togetherness. So the documentary closes as softly as it began. Not with a final answer, not with proof, but with space. Space for you, listening, to lean into the quiet, to rest within the unanswered mystery. For if we were never alone, then perhaps we are still not. Somewhere, in the silence between isotopes, between stones, between dreams and myths, memory still breathes. And that memory, whether carried in the earth or in us, is what keeps us company tonight. And as dust settles, as silence deepens, let us remember. We do not need certainty to feel connection. We do not need evidence to feel presence. The earth itself, slow and patient, is company enough, and if others once walked with us, then they are company still, in the silence, in the memory, in the endless unfolding of time. Together, in the silence, perhaps we are still never alone.